On Mother's Day, my son, a young, wealthy, and busy businessman, came to visit me, holding a bouquet as bright as the morning Sunday. He placed it on the table, looked at me with a gentle but distant expression, and said, "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." I froze. My heart started pounding. $5,000? For the past 8 months, I'd been living on food packages from the church and small donations from kind neighbors. I whispered, my voice trembling, "Son, the church is helping me get by." He stared at me, the smile vanishing from his lips. And then my daughter-in-law appeared radiant in a silk dress, shiny high heels, and a cloud of expensive perfume that drifted through the room like mockery. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were colder than any winter I've ever known. She didn't realize that on that very day, the last light of her elegance would fade forever. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Margaret Hayes, a 67-year-old widow living alone in a small house on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. This house used to be filled with laughter, the place where my husband and I raised our only son, David. After my husband passed away from a heart attack 10 years ago, I learned to slow down, tending my garden, cooking, occasionally teaching Bible classes at St. Mary's Church down the street. I didn't have much, but it was enough until old age came knocking, and everything grew more expensive with each passing day. David, the boy I once carried in my arms, is now a millionaire at 38. He owns a chain of tech companies, drives a brand new Tesla, and lives in a mansion in Park Cities where the annual property tax alone equals what I've earned in my entire life. I was proud of him, of course. I raised him with these hands, believing he would grow into a good, kind, and grateful man. So when he walked into my house that afternoon, sunlight spilling across his tired but handsome face, my heart warmed until he spoke. "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right?" It felt like someone had sucked the air out of the room. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my fingers clenched the corner of my old apron. I tried to smile, but my lips were dry as dust. $5,000? I repeated, my voice catching. "Son, the church is helping me survive." David's eyes widened, his smile dissolving. He glanced toward the woman who had just entered, Clara, his wife, in a pearl-colored silk dress and shimmering silver heels. The scent of Chanel, no. 5 filled my small living room, overpowering the smell of the apple pie I had just baked to welcome my son. Clara smiled lightly, a smile that could melt a room if it weren't so cold. "Oh, Mother, you must have forgotten," she said sweetly, her voice like honey over ice. "I stop by every month to bring the money, remember?" I looked at her calmly. "If you did bring it, then it must have gotten lost somewhere," I said, barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of cars outside, and the pounding of my own heart. David looked between us, between the gray-haired mother in her apron and the glamorous wife in her designer dress. His brow furrowed. "Clara, you have been bringing the money, right? I transfer it to you every month." Clara tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "Of course, David. I come here every month." "Maybe Mother just forgot. You know, old age. The memory isn't what it used to be." The words were soft as feathers, but they landed on my heart like stone. Old age. I'd heard that phrase too many times since my husband died from people who thought an old widow was nothing but a fading memory. But I knew my memory. I remembered every bill, every prayer, every face at church. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that Clara had never given me a single penny. I nodded slightly, choosing silence. Some battles aren't meant to be fought right away, they're meant to be observed. David stood, walked over, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, it's probably just a misunderstanding. I'll check the accounts." I just want you to live comfortably, without worry. I smiled faintly, but something inside me had awakened a quiet storm of suspicion and resolve. I said nothing more, just cleared the table and placed a glass of orange juice in front of him. As David sat down, Clara moved gracefully to his side, resting a possessive hand on his shoulder. Her gaze swept over me, cool, dismissive, the look of someone who believes money can buy integrity. The air in the room turned cold. Even though the sun outside was blazing, a chill ran down my spine. Clara glanced around the room, her eyes brushing over the old photo frames on the wall. David as a little boy, golden hair, bright eyes, a carefree smile. She exhaled softly. "You've done such a great job keeping the house clean, Mother, even at your age." I smiled faintly. "Old, yes, but not so old that I forget who comes through my door, Clara." David looked at me uneasy. "Mom, come on, it's Mother's Day. Don't get upset. I just want you to be happy." "My son," I said, my eyes still on Clara, "so do I. But happiness doesn't come from what people say they've done for you, it comes from what they've actually done." David froze, and Clara's smile tightened before disappearing altogether. After they left, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, spreading across the old wooden table. $5,000 a month, 8 months. $40,000. That money could have fixed the leaking roof, replaced my broken fridge, helped me live out my final years in comfort. Instead, I'd been counting canned soup from the church pantry and thanking God for every loaf of donated bread. I pressed a hand to my chest, not out of anger, but from the ache that rose inside me. A silent, bone-deep ache. That night, I opened my old notebook, the one where I used to jot down grocery lists and prayers. But this time, I wrote something different. Find the truth. And beneath it, don't trust fake tears. I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. I wasn't weak. I'd survived loss, loneliness, and struggle, and I would survive this too. David might have been fooled, but I hadn't. And if Clara thought I'd sit quietly while she played perfect, she had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. I spent the rest of that afternoon in my small kitchen, sunlight cutting through the curtains into long golden lines across the floor. The jasmine tea on the table had gone cold, but I stayed seated, staring at my old phone, asking myself, could I be wrong? Maybe the bank made a mistake? Maybe Clara sent the money by mail? Or maybe, in a rare moment of confusion, I had simply forgotten? No. I knew every detail, every small gift I had ever received. There had been no letter, no envelope, no money from David. That evening, I pulled out my old accounting ledger, the one I kept from my years as treasurer at the church's women's committee. I flipped through the pages, each line precise: $12 for blood pressure medicine, $24 for utilities, $10 for community dinners at St. Mary's, every expense recorded neatly. No mention of transfer from David Hayes. Nothing. The next morning, I went to First Texas Community Bank, where I still kept a small savings account. I sat across from a young teller named Molly and handed her my passbook. "Please check if there have been any transfers from David Hayes. He says he's been sending me $5,000 each month for the past 8 months." Molly looked surprised, typed a few lines, then shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, there's nothing. The only activity was a $1.35 interest payment back in February." I nodded, thanked her, and stood up. Outside, the Texas morning wind swept through my gray hair. I stood on the sidewalk, feeling as if a stone had fallen straight through my chest. No transfers, no envelopes, no letters, nothing. For 8 months, I had clipped coupons from the local paper, bought canned soup instead of fresh vegetables, and quietly thanked God every time the church delivered food. I was used to eating alone, counting change before heading to the store, but never, not once, had I imagined that behind my son's silence was a lie. I went home, set my purse down, and sat motionless. The ticking of the wall clock filled the house, the wedding gift my husband had given me 40 years ago. Each slow-moving minute hand seemed to whisper, "The truth is coming." That afternoon I went to St. Mary's Church as usual. Reverend Cole, who'd known me for over 20 years, saw me sitting quietly in the last pew after the service. He walked over, his voice kind. "Mrs. Hayes, are you all right? You look tired today." I smiled faintly, hiding my trembling hands. "I'm just trying to understand why my son's letters never arrived." Reverend Cole placed a hand on my shoulder. "The Lord has a way of bringing truth to light. Don't lose faith." I nodded, but inside, faith wasn't enough anymore. I needed action. That night, I opened a brown leather notebook, David's gift for my 60th birthday. On the first page, instead of a prayer, I wrote, "If they're lying, I'll make them tell the truth through the law." I pressed the pen hard into the paper. Under the lamp, the words glowed like a vow. From that day forward, I began documenting everything. Every time Clara visited, I noted the date, time, and her exact words. Thursday, June 14th, Clara stopped by with a cake. Said, "The money's been sent, maybe the bank's delayed." No envelope. No proof. Saturday, July 12th. Called. Said she couldn't come because of a charity meeting. I heard restaurant music in the background. Line by line, I recorded it all. No anger, no hatred, just the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing numbers, knowing they never lie. The weeks that followed, Clara kept visiting, always flawless. Designer dresses, expensive handbags, sparkling heels. Each time, she brought a small gift. Flowers, cookies, sometimes scented candles. But never an envelope. One afternoon in August, while I was watering the garden, her white Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Clara stepped out, radiant as ever, holding a bunch of lavender. "I brought you some flowers to help you relax," she said sweetly. "Stress isn't good for the memory." I set the watering can down and wiped my hands on my apron. "My memory's just fine, Clara. Fine enough to remember that the last time you brought me money was never." Her face twitched, but she quickly recovered with a bright smile. "Oh, Mother, you must be mistaken. I've been sending it, your bank must be at fault." I smiled and began arranging the flowers. "Maybe, but I already asked the bank. They said nothing's come through for 8 months. Silence. Even the sparrows on the fence stopped chirping. Clara fidgeted with her necklace. "I'll double check," she said quickly, then hurried back to her car, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume. I stood there watching the car disappear, a mix of bitterness and clarity filling my chest. She had lied, and now she knew that I knew. That evening I wrote, "Clara, August 22nd, lied. Nervous, left early." Each line felt like a hammer striking the hurt inside me. I was no longer the frail mother praying in silence. I was Margaret Hayes, the woman who had survived loss, debt, and empty promises, and I would survive once more to reclaim the truth. In the weeks that followed, I contacted David's bank, pretending to ask about family gift transfers. They couldn't share private information, but one kind employee hinted if funds were transferred, they'd have to land in an account under your name. If you never received them, someone might have used a different account in your name. The words sent a chill down my spine. Another account bearing my name, but not mine. I closed my notebook and exhaled deeply. I knew what I was up against. Clara was smart, charming, manipulative, even capable of bending her husband to her will. But I'd been an accountant for 3 companies. I'd managed thousands of dollars without losing a cent. If someone dared to forge my name, I would find them. That night, I reread every note I'd written. The lamplight glowed over my shaky yet steady handwriting. Between the lines, I could almost see my husband's face. He used to say, "Margaret, If someone underestimates you, don't shout. Let them hear the sound of the truth instead. I closed the notebook, feeling a strange calm. The next morning I went back to church, carrying a small envelope filled with copies of my notes. I handed it to Reverend Cole and said softly, "Father, if one day I can't come to service, please keep this safe for me." He looked worried. "Margaret, what are you doing?" I smiled gently but firmly. "I'm just preparing for the truth to be heard." As I walked home, my heart felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. I knew the road ahead would be long, there would be tears, pain, and betrayal, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I would get back every single $5,000 they took from me, but more than that, I would reclaim the respect they thought I'd lost with age. As the sun set behind the old oak trees, I sat on my porch, gazing at the burning red horizon. In that golden light, I whispered, "Clara, you picked the wrong woman to fool, and this old mother still has a few lessons left to teach you." I smiled faintly, closed my notebook, and wrote one last line at the bottom of the page. "The first step toward justice is memory." And in the Texas dusk, I knew my fight had just begun. That morning the Texas air was warmer than usual. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and jasmine from the vine I'd planted behind the porch. I was trimming my lavender bushes when I heard the low, smooth sound of an expensive engine approaching. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway made my heart tighten slightly. A brand-new silver Lexus stopped at the gate, its polished paint gleaming so brightly I had to squint. The door opened, and Clara stepped out stunning, as if she'd just walked out of a fashion magazine. She wore a cream linen dress, oversized sunglasses, and mirror-shiny heels. In her right hand, she carried a large gift basket wrapped with a golden ribbon. She smiled, her voice sweet as honey layered over steel. "Mother, I brought you a little something." David's been in meetings all morning, so I came in his place. I wiped my hands on my apron and watched her climb the porch steps. "How thoughtful." "You two must be very busy," I said softly, without smiling. Clara's gaze wandered across the garden as she exhaled. "Oh my, your garden is still as beautiful as ever. I don't know how you manage it all by yourself." "With these hands and a little patience," I replied, tucking my shears into the potting soil. A moment later, she placed the basket on the patio table. Fancy cookies, a jar of orange marmalade, and a small bottle of wine, all neatly wrapped but lacking any real warmth. I knew that kind of gift, expensive, pretty, and empty. I sat down in the wooden chair, poured 2 glasses of iced tea, and looked her straight in the eye. "Clara, let me ask you something. Where's this month's money? The $5,000 you said you'd bring over?" For a split second, her smile froze, barely noticeable, like a passing cloud. Then she laughed, a sharp, hollow sound like glass tapping glass. "Oh, Mother, I must have left it in the car." Her voice pitched slightly higher as she fidgeted with the glass of tea without drinking it. I glanced toward the driveway, where the Lexus gleamed under the sunday. The reflection off the hood highlighted every smooth curve of the car. A brand new vehicle with temporary plates, clearly a recent purchase. I smiled slowly. "Nice car, Clara. Must have cost quite a bit." She shrugged, her laugh brittle. "Oh, not really, Mother. I just upgraded for convenience. My boutique work requires a professional image." "Of course," I said calmly. "A new car for work, and old envelopes that keep getting left in the car." "How odd." Her face stiffened for half a second before she forced another smile. "Oh, Mother, you don't trust me anymore. Next time I'll bring the bank receipt, all right?" I didn't reply. We sat there quietly, the porch fan whirring softly above us. The sound of cicadas in the yard filled the silence like a restless hum. Clara stood first, pretending to check her watch. "I have to run. I've got a client meeting. But don't worry, I'll remind David to resend the money through the bank. I'm sorry for any small mix-up." I nodded. All right, go on then. Oh, and don't forget the envelope in your car this time. She paused for a second, smiling thinly, a mix of annoyance and caution. You're very sharp, Mother, she said, then turned to leave. I watched her walk away, the sound of her heels striking the wooden steps steady and cold, like a clock ticking down. The car door slammed shut, the engine started, and the Lexus disappeared down the road, leaving a streak of blinding sunlight behind. When the sound of the car faded, I sat back down, my fingers interlaced, a heavy weight pressed against my chest. I no longer had doubts, I knew for sure. I rose and walked back into the house. Each step across the wooden floor echoed like a heartbeat in my mind. I opened the drawer, took out my brown leather notebook, and wrote, September 10th. Clara came alone, brought a gift basket, claimed she left the money in the car. New Lexus. No proof. Voice unsteady, avoided eye contact. I set the pen down and took a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve did not. That afternoon, I walked to the post office down the road, where the public phone still worked. I didn't want to call from home, not when I suspected Clara might be watching. I dialed David's company and spoke politely, my tone steady. Hello, this is Margaret Hayes, David Hayes's mother. I'd like to speak with someone in accounting. It's a personal matter. After a short hold, a middle-aged woman answered. This is Sandra Miller, head accountant. Mrs. Hayes, how can I help you? I gripped the receiver tightly, keeping my voice calm. Thank you, Sandra. I just need to confirm something small. My son said his company has been deducting $5,000 each month from his personal account to send to me. I'd like to know if that's correct. There was a short pause. Then Sandra spoke, her tone hesitant. Mrs. Hayes, I can't disclose personal financial details, but let me check. Yes, I recall seeing automated transfers on the same day every month for that exact amount. It does appear that the money was sent, but I'm not sure to whom. To whom? I repeated. It wasn't sent to me? I'm not certain, Mrs. Hayes. The recipient's name matches yours, but the account number is different. I assumed it was yours. A chill ran down my spine. I forced myself to speak evenly. Thank you, Sandra. That's all I needed for now. I hung up and stood motionless in the phone booth. My heart raced, but my mind was clear as glass. There it was, the truth. Someone had created a fake account under my name. And only one person was close enough to pull that off. Clara. On the walk home, my shadow stretched long across the road. The wind carried the scent of scorched grass and dry earth, a smell that reminded me of poor Texas summers long ago, when my father used to say, if you want to know who's honest, look at their hands. Honest hands always show the marks of work. I thought of Clara's hands, long, manicured fingers, diamond rings, holding designer handbags. Not a single callus, not a trace of real labor. That night I skipped dinner. I made a cup of peppermint tea and sat at the kitchen table under the warm yellow light. The house was so quiet I could hear the last cicadas outside fading into the night. I opened a new page and wrote, September 10th. Clara visited, elegant and pretending to care. New car, same lies. Called David's company, confirmed. The money's still being transferred, but not to my account. Tomorrow the truth begins to surface. I put down the pen and closed the notebook. The small lamp reflected my shadow in the window pane. A silver-haired woman, small in stature but with eyes that still burned bright. I knew that starting tomorrow, I wouldn't just be a waiting mother anymore. I would be a seeker of justice. I turned off the light and stepped out onto the porch. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and damp wood. In the corner of the garden, moonlight fell on the old wooden bench where my husband and I used to sit and talk. I touched its worn armrest and whispered, Frank, if you were still here, you'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you? The only reply was the whisper of wind beneath the eaves, but I understood. It was an answer, I went back inside, locked the door, and stood quietly in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't tired or defeated. She was Margaret Hayes, a mother who would never again let anyone take her dignity. And I knew that when morning came, Clara's game would start to fall apart piece by piece. The next morning, while I was cutting lavender stems to dry, a sudden, firm knock echoed at the door. Not the soft tap of a mail carrier or neighbor. This was steady, deliberate. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to open it. Standing on the porch was a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair, dressed neatly in a charcoal suit that looked a little travel-worn. He smiled politely and gave a small nod. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes? I'm Bennett, chief accountant at your son's company, Hayes and Partners." I narrowed my eyes slightly. "You're Bennett?" "I only know Sandra, the accountant I spoke to on the phone." He nodded. "Yes, Sandra is my assistant. She told me about your call yesterday, and I thought, perhaps you should know a few things." His voice was calm but serious, tinged with regret. I invited him inside and poured a glass of water. Morning light streamed through the window, catching the lines on his face, the look of a man who'd seen more than he wished to. He set his leather briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside was a thick folder, neatly clipped and organized. I saw sharp-printed text, rows of numbers, the familiar language of accounting, my world for 30 years before retirement. He slid the folder toward me and spoke slowly. "These are copies of 8 transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 total. Recipient, an account under the name Clara Hayes." It felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over me. My hands shook as I flipped through each page. The papers were clear: sender, David Hayes; recipient, Clara Hayes; verified by the bank; same date every month; steady as clockwork for 8 months. I looked up, my voice hoarse. "Mr. Bennett, who opened that account?" He sighed, removed his glasses and wiped them with a cloth. "Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Hayes. Every document for the sub-account bears her signature and a signed authorization from David." I froze. "Authorization? You mean David gave her permission to use my name?" He nodded. "Most likely he didn't read the forms carefully. She presented an ID copy of you, which I suspect was forged, very sophisticated. The system automatically registered it as your account, even though the recipient was her." I pressed a hand to my forehead, the room spinning slightly. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. For 8 months, Clara had used my name, a mother's name, to siphon money from my own son. I asked quietly, "And David? He doesn't know?" Bennett hesitated before answering. "Honestly, I don't think so. David's a hard-working man, but he trusts people too easily. He lets Clara handle most of the paperwork. And..." He paused and looked up at me. "She's also been using the company credit card for personal expenses." I stared at him. "The company card?" "Yes. The corporate credit card of Hayes and Partners. Supposed to be for client entertainment and business expenses, but recently we found irregular charges, spa visits, jewelry, clothing, even first-class flights to New York. Over $30,000 in just 3 months. I sat in silence. The words spa, jewelry, flights echoed in my head like a hammer striking metal. I turned to look out the window. The morning sun glowed over the wooden bench where Clara and I once sat drinking tea while she chatted about her work. I remembered her voice that day. "Mother, David's so busy. I handle everything for him." Now I knew. Everything meant every dollar. I turned back to Bennett, my voice raspy but firm. "Mr. Bennett, if I want to expose this, will you help me?" He met my gaze, his gray-blue eyes steady. "Mrs. Hayes, I believe in justice, but I also believe in evidence. We need to prepare carefully. Otherwise, she'll twist the narrative and turn David against you. Clara is not an easy opponent." I nodded. "I know. I've seen her do it before, smiling while she lies. Bennett gave a faint, grim smile. "I'll help, but give me time to gather everything. I need to pull all transaction histories, related documents, and secure written confirmation from the bank that the account isn't yours. It'll take a few days, but I promise we'll have the truth." I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time: integrity. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," I said softly. "You have no idea how much this means to me." He closed the folder and stood. "I'm just doing what's right, Mrs. Hayes. And, I'm sorry to say this, but cases like yours happen more often than you'd think. Many people are betrayed by those closest to them." I nodded, my eyes landing on a framed family photo on the wall. David, at 10 years old, grinning beside his father. I remembered that day clearly. It had rained lightly, and my husband had said, "Teach him to tell the difference between good men and smooth talkers, Maggie. They often wear the same smile." Bennett left afterward, leaving me alone with the stack of papers on the table. The door clicked shut, and the house went quiet again. I stared at the thick file. Every transfer line spelled out, each one a piece of evidence of betrayal. I carefully placed everything into a small metal box and slid it under the cabinet. When I turned the key, it felt like I was locking another door, the last door of my trust. As afternoon faded, sunlight spilled across the porch and lit up my gray hair. I brewed a cup of black tea, sat at the kitchen table, and looked out at the garden where the lavender swayed gently in the wind. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me, a quiet fire burned. I took out my notebook, opened to a fresh page, and wrote slowly but firmly, September 11th. Mr. Bennett came. Brought records of 8 transfers, $5,000 each. Month to an account under the name Clara Hayes. Clara is also using the company card for personal spending. David was deceived, not just my money, but his too. I have an ally. The fight begins. I set the pen down and looked toward the window. Outside, the sky burned red, like a streak of fire slashing across the clouds. In a low, steady voice, I said, "Clara, you forgot I worked as an accountant for 40 years. I can read lies in numbers, and this time, the numbers will speak for me." I closed the notebook, feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There was someone, a witness, willing to stand with me. That night, I slept better than usual. The crickets in the yard sounded like a steady count of hope. In my dream, I saw Bennett standing in a white light, holding up the file, while Clara backed away, her face shaken as each secret peeled back. And when I woke, I knew I was no longer a victim. I was the one setting the truth in motion. 3 days later, with every fact in my head lined up as neatly as rows on a balance sheet, I decided to act. I called David. My son's voice was warm and familiar, but I heard a hint of exhaustion. "Mom, I'm sorry I've been swamped lately. Clara says she's been visiting you regularly, right?" I smiled and kept my tone light. "She has, son. Clara's very thoughtful. I'm thinking of inviting you both to dinner this Sunday. It's been a while since we've had a proper meal together." David agreed happily, never noticing the thin wire hidden in that invitation. I spent all Sunday morning preparing. Not because I wanted a perfect dinner, but because I wanted it to feel completely ordinary. Honey roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple walnut salad, and apple pie, David's childhood favorites. I polished my late husband's old silverware and set the dining table with soft candlelight. Everything was arranged carefully, warm, sincere, and just enough to make a liar let down her guard. When the clock struck 6, I heard a familiar engine at the gate. A gleaming silver Lexus slid into the driveway. Clara stepped out first, flawless as always, soft waves in her hair, a jade silk dress, and a faint trail of Dior. David followed with a bouquet of white lilies. "Mom, you look great." David grinned, placing the flowers on the table. "Son, I'm better than ever, thanks to God's grace and the two of you." Clara smiled, her lips curled in that usual smug way. I recognized that look, the look of someone convinced she holds every string. I poured wine and tea, chatted about the weather, the lavender, and the new neighbors down the street. Everything flowed as if no shadow of doubt had ever passed through this house. I let the room warm up, let her relax. When the main course was served, I looked up and smiled. I truly appreciate you both, especially for this month's $5,000. Clara paused just a fraction, then flashed a bright smile and sipped her wine. Oh, Mother, please don't be so formal. I'm just doing what I should. I nodded, pretending to be shy. I'm thrilled. I just bought a new heater. Texas gets chilly early, and thanks to that money, I feel much more at ease. Clara's smile widened, smug and satisfied. She tilted her head toward David as if to say, "See? Everything's fine." I watched her slowly, then asked in an offhand way, like it was nothing at all, "Oh, Clara, I'm just curious. What day do you usually send it?" She didn't brace herself, she answered instantly, like a reflex. "The 10th every month, Mother." I nodded lightly. But before I could say more, David spoke, a bit puzzled. "Wait. Not the 10th, honey. I set the auto transfer for the 15th. The room went silent. Do you hear that silence the moment a liar steps right into her own trap? If it were you, facing someone who deceived you like this, would you stay quiet like I did or call it out on the spot? Tell me in the comments. I think most of us have lived through a shattered dinner like that at least once. The faint clink of a knife on a plate sounded harsh. They stared at each other. Clara forced a smile and blinked a few times. David frowned, tilting his head. "Really?" she said with a strained laugh. "I thought you said the 10th. David frowned deeper. "No, I'm sure it's the 15th. I picked that day because that's when payroll hits." The room sank into a cold stillness. I smiled gently and set my fork down. "Oh, wonderful. I'll go to the bank on the 15th to check. Just to make sure the system isn't having issues." Clara gave a brittle laugh, trying to hide her unease. "Oh, Mother, you're so careful." "Don't worry, I've been sending it regularly." David nodded, but his eyes had shifted. He turned to his wife, about to say something, but she quickly changed the subject to work and the weather. I sat quietly, watching them both. Inside me was a clean, perfect calm, the calm of someone who knows she's set the exact right trap. After dinner, I brought out dessert crisp apple pie, cinnamon drifting through the room. David praised it. Clara barely ate, glancing at her watch as if eager to leave. I knew she was struggling to breathe in a room she thought she controlled. At the door, I said softly, "Thank you both for coming. I haven't laughed this much in a long time. Remember, I'll check the account on the 15th just to be sure the bank system isn't acting up." Clara forced a smile. "Yes, Mother. I'm sure there won't be any problem." David kissed my cheek, his eyes gentle as always. But I saw something else there, a thin new line of doubt. When the Lexus pulled away, I stood in the doorway, watching the taillights fade. The night wind moved through the yard, rattling the wooden door. I went back inside and closed it softly. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was release. I went straight to the small office off the kitchen and turned on the computer. The glow from the screen caught my husband's photo. His kind smile felt like a quiet push forward. I opened my email and wrote to the only two people I trusted now: Bennett, the honest accountant, and Amelia Rowe, my old college friend, who now specializes in financial fraud. I typed slowly, heartbeat steady, eyes clear. Subject: It's time to begin. Bennett. Amelia. Everything's ready. I just confirmed Clara lied about the transfer date. They think I believe them, but they contradicted each other right to my face. I want us to move forward with the plan. Please start checking all transactions and prepare the comparison file. By the 15th, I want every piece of evidence lined up. It's time for her to self-destruct. Margaret. I reread the last line and smiled faintly. There was something about self-destruct that made me feel lighter, not from vengeance, but because justice would come from the liar's own hands. I hit send and leaned back. Outside, the night breeze stirred the curtains with the scent of jasmine and damp soil. I closed my eyes and listened to the clock ticking, counting down to the 15th, the day the truth would begin to crack through. 2 days later, Bennett replied. The email was short, just like him. I obtained confirmation from the bank. The account under your name was opened by Clara with forged documents. They'll release data once we have a subpoena. Amelia will handle that. Everything is moving in the right direction, B. I read it, feeling my chest tighten and then loosen like hearing an old iron gate swing open. I'm not cruel. I just want the truth spoken so my son can wake up. I want David to understand that trust is not a blank check for someone to drain until nothing is left. That night, I opened my notebook and added one more line as a small ritual. September 13th, dinner. Went perfectly. Clara exposed herself. David began to doubt. 15th bank check. Justice is coming, soft as a breeze. I closed the notebook and blew out the candle. In the dark, moonlight filtered through the window onto my face. I looked in the mirror and saw a silver-haired woman, slight but bright-eyed. And I whispered slowly, to myself, or maybe to my husband, long gone. Frank, do you see? She thinks she's clever, but her own mouth tightened the noose. All I have to do is stay quiet and wait for the 15th. I smiled a small smile, warm enough to fill the room. The trap was set, and the prey was walking in. The next morning, the Texas sky was startlingly clear. I sat by the window with a cup of hot jasmine tea, strangely calm. Today was the day Bennett had promised to send everything. In just a few hours, every lie would have a shape black ink on white paper. Around 8 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Bennett. Mrs. Hayes, his voice steady and low. It's all done. I just sent you the full statements with related invoices. Amelia has reviewed them, she says, with your signature. We can open a legal case. I thanked him softly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I never imagined that at my age I'd need an accountant and a lawyer just to protect the money my son intended for me. 15 minutes later, the mail carrier knocked. A large, sealed manila envelope stamped, confidential, Hayes financial record. I set it on the table and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were dozens of clean printouts, 8 transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 in total. Sender: David Hayes. Recipient: Clara Hayes. Bold, even lines on official bank paper. I read them twice and still felt disbelief, as if the numbers were laughing at my faith. At the bottom, Bennett's blue ink note: Mrs. Clara Hayes used this as a personal account. In addition to the 8 transfers, there are other charges. Via the secondary card, spa, shopping, travel, and a new car lease. Total spending over 8 months, $47,800. I sat still. Morning light slipped through the blinds and laid a pale gold over the pages, the color of truth. I turned to the next sheet. A spa receipt in Houston for $1,200. Cancun travel for 2 people, $3,600. A new Lexus purchase with a $15,000 down payment. Each receipt was a small knife. I remembered her walking into my house, perfumed and polished, holding gifts, smiling softly, saying, "Mother, I just want you to know I care for you like my own." Now I understood care meant draining every dollar under my name. I sat for a long time, breathed deeply, then reached for my brown leather notebook, the one I call my Justice Journal. Under the date, I wrote carefully, one clear word at a time, September 17th. Received Bennett's records, 8 transfers of $5,000, all into Clara's hands. Spa, travel, new car. $47,800, the price of trust. My hand trembled, not from fear, but because I was about to reclaim the dignity that had been stolen. That afternoon, Amelia Rowe called. Her voice was firm and precise, the tone of someone seasoned by tough courtrooms. "Margaret, I've reviewed everything Bennett sent. It's all solid. This is a textbook case of financial exploitation of an elder. We can go criminal or civil, your call." I paused, then answered quietly. "Not yet. I don't want the court to see it before David does. He needs to witness it with his own eyes. Only then will justice mean something." Amelia was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "You're right. Nothing hurts more than a son realizing his wife has exploited his mother's trust." I nodded. "That's why I'd like Reverend Cole to help me. Arrange a small charity evening. A pretext, so they'll come." Amelia gave a soft, knowing laugh. "A staged night to expose the truth. Smart, Margaret. I'll ask Bennett to condense the file, give David a brief summary he can't ignore." Near dusk, I drove to St. Mary's. The red evening light washed over the old stone steps. Reverend Cole was lining up wooden chairs in the hall. After I explained the plan, he thought for a moment, then smiled kindly. "Sometimes the Lord doesn't need thunder to reveal sin, Margaret. He only needs the small light of truth." I squeezed his hand in thanks. "I just want David to see that light, not for revenge, but so he stops being blind." On the way home, I stopped by the corner store for a few supplies for the evening I was planning. Everything outside looked peaceful, with no hint that in just a few days, Clara's whole world would come crashing down. That evening, when I got home, I opened Bennett's file again. I spread everything across the dining table, every statement, every receipt, every piece of evidence. With a red pen, I marked the large withdrawals, then slipped them into a thick beige envelope. On the front, I wrote in bold, steady letters, "Donation documents, Senior Assistance Fund." Only I knew there wasn't a single donation inside, just guilt and deceit. I sat staring at the papers for a long time. My hands trembled, not from fear of retaliation, but because I could feel my heart beating strong again after months of numbness. For so long I'd thought I was just a widowed old woman living simply, someone who needed to be taken care of. But looking at that pile of proof, I realized I was never weak. I had just been convinced to believe I was. I stood up, poured a glass of water, and looked out at the backyard. The night sky was full of stars, so quiet I could hear the crickets between gusts of wind. I remembered what my husband used to say, "If someone hurts you, don't pray for their apology. Let them see their reflection in the mirror," I whispered. "I'm about to do exactly that." Around 8 p.m., the phone rang. It was Bennett again. "Mrs. Hayes, I just wanted to let you know, Amelia has everything ready in case you decide to file, but I respect your timing. Holding off until the right moment is wise. Clara will expose herself soon enough." I smiled. "I know. Thank you, Bennett. You've done more than an accountant's job. You've helped me believe in justice again." After hanging up, I locked the file away in the cabinet, just under the drawer that held my family photos. On top, I left a small note. "This is evidence not just of fraud, but of a mother who refuses to stay silent." Then I closed the drawer and turned the key, hearing the soft click, a small sound, but final, like a promise kept. That night, I wrote one short line in my notebook, like a quiet summary. Bennett gathered statements, receipts, travel tickets, and the new car papers. Clara spent over $40,000, all from the mother's allowance account. Amelia confirmed. Enough proof for an elder financial exploitation case. But I won't take it to court yet. My son needs to see it first. Reverend Cole will help stage the fake charity dinner. The envelope will sit in the center of the table. My hands tremble, not from fear, but because I'm about to reclaim my dignity. Tonight, I'll sleep in peace. I set the pen down and exhaled. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over an old family photo me with David when he was little, back when his smile was pure, untouched by ambition or that sweet-faced woman beside him now. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "You once told me, Mom, you're the person I trust most in the world. I'll make you remember that." I turned off the light and walked slowly to my bedroom. The night breeze slipped through the curtains, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. I lay down, pulled the blanket over me, and felt light, as if the months of humiliation had finally lifted. For the first time in 8 long months, I slept peacefully. Not because Clara hadn't yet faced punishment, but because I knew the truth was on my side. I had never loved a Sunday evening more. The late Texas sunlight poured over the small garden, turning the lavender vines golden. In the kitchen, the pot of red wine beef stew simmered softly, filling the house with the aroma of herbs. It was David's favorite dish since childhood. I still remembered how, every birthday, he'd ask for it because Mom's stew tastes better than any restaurant. This time, I wasn't cooking out of love, but as part of a ritual. A final dinner for my son to finally see the truth I had hidden too long. On the table, I laid out a crisp white tablecloth, antique porcelain dishes, and 3 small wine glasses. In the center, the beige envelope rested neatly like an invisible guest waiting to be acknowledged. Around 7 p.m., I heard the car outside. Through the window, I saw David and Clara arriving. He wore a simple white shirt, while she, as always, appeared overdressed, a pale pink silk dress, new heels, and a string of pearls gleaming at her neck. "Mom!" David hugged me tightly. "I miss this smell, your stew. It smells like home." I smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I made it for you, just like old times." Clara stood behind him, that polished, fake smile glued to her lips. "Oh, how cozy. You always make dinner feel so special, Mother." "Yes," I said softly. "Tonight will be very special." About 15 minutes later, Reverend Cole arrived, holding a large, white-wrapped envelope. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Here are the donation papers you asked me to bring." I took it with a nod of thanks and gestured for him to join us. Clara tilted her head, her voice syrupy. "Oh, so this really is a charity dinner. Mother? I thought you were joking." I poured everyone wine, smiling gently. "Yes, a dinner to talk about trust, giving, and honesty." The words made Clara stiffen slightly, but she quickly smoothed her expression. David kept smiling, unaware of the tension rising beneath the table. Once everyone was seated, I opened the envelope Reverend had brought. The papers inside were neatly arranged, Bennett's precision in every line. I pulled out the stack and spread the first sheet on the table. "Son," I said slowly, "this is the list of all the donations for Mother over the past 8 months. I think you should take a look." David frowned. "Donations? Mom, I've been sending you the transfers every month." I slid the statement toward him. The bold print was unmistakable. Recipient: Clara Hayes. Amount: $5,000. Date: 15th of each month. David went silent. His eyes dropped to the page, widening from confusion to shock. Clara jumped in, voice sweet but pitched high. "Oh, that must be some mix-up, Mother. You've been getting the money, right?" "Banks make mistakes with recipient names all the time." I kept my voice calm. "Is that so? Then how about this spa bill in Houston, around $1,200, charged to the secondary card under your name? Was that the bank's mistake too?" Her face stiffened, but she forced a laugh. "Oh dear, maybe someone used my name by accident." Before she could finish, a deep male voice came from the doorway. "No, Mrs. Hayes, no one used your name by accident. I'm the one who prepared those records." Everyone turned. Bennett stood at the threshold, holding more printed pages. I had asked him to come, but hadn't told anyone else. Clara's face went pale. David looked at him, confused. "Who are you?" "I'm Bennett," he said firmly. chief accountant at your firm and the one your mother authorized to investigate the transfers made under her name." The air froze. I rose, facing Clara. "Bennett can verify every amount, every signature, every transaction. 8 transfers, 5,000 each. Not once did they reach me." David turned to his wife, voice breaking. "Clara, what is this?" She grabbed his hand, tears welling up. I just borrowed it, that's all. I was going to pay it back. I didn't want to upset your mother." I sighed softly. 8 months of borrowing? And by forging bank papers under your mother-in-law's name?" Clara sobbed harder, but her tears didn't carry guilt, only desperation. David pulled his hand away, eyes burning. "What did you do to my mother?" he shouted, voice shaking with fury. "I sent that money so she could live comfortably. You used it for cars, spas, vacations, and lied to my face?" Clara stepped back, face drained of color. "You don't understand, Enough." David slammed his palm on the table. The glass rattled sharply. The room fell silent, only Clara's ragged breathing and my pounding heartbeat filled the air. Reverend Cole, who had sat quietly the whole time, folded his hands and spoke in a low, steady tone. "Sometimes God doesn't need to punish the guilty. He just lets them see their true reflection." I sat back down and looked at Clara, my voice calm. "You know, I didn't need that money. What I needed was respect. And you took that not just from me, but from your husband too." Clara sobbed, stammering, "Mother, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help David manage things better. I didn't mean." I shook my head. "Stop lying. You didn't manage, you stole." Bennett stepped forward, placing the final file in front of David. "These are the originals, Mr. Hayes. Forged authorizations, bank records, and receipts. Keep them. You'll need them to protect what's yours." David said nothing. He stared at the numbers, then lifted his eyes to me. In them, I saw pain, shame, and the first spark of awakening. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was such a fool to trust her." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "No, son. The mistake isn't in trust, it's in those who betray it." Clara burst into sobs, glancing wildly around for an escape. "I can't take this anymore," she screamed, then suddenly stood. "I don't need anyone's pity. If you want to believe her, go ahead." She snatched her purse and stormed out. Her heels struck the wooden floor, each step sounding like the end of something. David didn't stop her. He just sat, head bowed. The door slammed shut. Silence fell. No more crying, no more excuses, only the fading smell of stew and the heavy presence of truth. I looked at the open envelope, papers scattered proof of 8 months of deceit. I exhaled softly. "It's done," I said quietly. "The curtain's fallen." Bennett nodded, gathering the files. Reverend Cole rose and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done what not every mother has the courage to do, Margaret." I smiled faintly, but inside, there was an empty ache. This victory didn't bring joy, only release. When everyone left, I stayed behind. I cleared the table, the half-eaten plates, the red wine glasses, the chair where Clara had sat, still faintly warm. I looked around the room, remembering every word, every glance. 8 months of deception, and in one evening it had shattered like glass. I gathered the fallen pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in the envelope. My hands trembled not from fear, but because I had finally reclaimed my dignity. Outside, the wind rose, lifting the curtains. I looked up at the sky, moonlight streaming through the window, shining on the envelope like a seal of truth. I knew every lie eventually comes to light. And tonight, it had right here in my own home. I picked up the envelope, noticing the blue stamp, Texas County Court. My chest tightened. I'd known this would come, but seeing it made my heart heavy. Inside was the official notice. Case No. 2-3CF98. 1. Margaret Hayes, plaintiff versus Clara Hayes, defendant. Elder financial exploitation and family fraud. Amelia had moved faster than I expected. She'd sent a short message. All evidence filed. Prepare for preliminary hearing next Monday. I set the letter on the table. Afternoon light filtered through the blinds, falling across Bennett's thick folder from the week before. I touched its smooth cover, cold to the touch, but holding 8 months of betrayal inside. Justice was close. But strangely, I felt no satisfaction. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray. The wind sharp like something about to break. I arrived early with Amelia. She wore a brown coat, her face stern but full of resolve. "You holding up, Margaret?" she asked as we walked into the main hall. I pressed my lips together. "I am. I just wish it didn't have to come to this." The courthouse hallway was long, tiled in glossy white, smelling faintly of coffee, paper, and tension. It was unfamiliar, but somehow it made me feel safe. When we entered the courtroom, Clara was already there. She sat at the defendant's table in a black suit, hair neatly tied back, her face pale but her eyes pretending calm. Beside her sat a young lawyer, nervous, likely hired last minute. David sat behind them, alone and silent. He didn't look at me or at her. His eyes were sunken, tired, and hollow. When I sat down, Clara glanced over and gave a faint smile, a mix of defiance and despair. The judge struck the gavel. The court is now in session for the case of elder financial exploitation, Margaret Hayes versus Clara Hayes. Amelia stood first, opening her file. Her voice was clear and steady. "Your Honor, for 8 consecutive months the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, used a fraudulent bank account under her mother-in-law's name to misappropriate a total of $40,000. Additionally, the defendant used a company's secondary credit card belonging to Hayes and Partners for personal expenses, including spa services, travel, and a private vehicle purchase." The courtroom went silent, except for the soft rustle of paper as Amelia laid out the evidence: bank statements, spa receipts, the Lexus invoice, Cancun tickets, each placed neatly before the judge. She paused, then looked directly at Clara. The defendant not only took money from her mother-in-law, a 67-year-old widow, but concealed it by forging legal documents and falsifying bank signatures. This was a deliberate, systematic act of deception. Clara's lawyer quickly stood, trying to object. "Your Honor, my client maintains this was merely a misunderstanding in household financial management. Mrs. Margaret Hayes is elderly and may have misremembered the transfers from her son's account and household expenses." I felt my blood boil. Clara lowered her head, feigning fragility, then looked up, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, my mother-in-law's been forgetful lately. I've brought her money many times, but she doesn't remember. I never meant to hurt anyone. Maybe she just misunderstood." Those words cut through my chest like a knife. I wanted to jump up and scream, but Amelia placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. Then she stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. "Your Honor, Mrs. Margaret Hayes' memory is sharp enough to document, in detail, every single day Clara visited and everything she said. And here is her journal to prove it." Amelia pulled out my brown leather notebook and held it up. "In this, Mrs. Hayes recorded 8 full months of visits, dates, times, and even the defendant's exact words. I left the envelope in the car. Every line and page perfectly matches the bank transaction data. If this is what you call memory loss, then it's the sharpest one I've ever seen." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge peered over his glasses, slowly flipped through a few pages of the file, then frowned and turned toward Bennett, who had been invited as an expert witness. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, "do you confirm the figures in this report?" Bennett stood, adjusted his tie, and replied firmly, "Your Honor, I am the chief accountant at Hayes and Partners. I confirm that all statements and reconciliations are authentic. Each transfer was made from Mr. David Hayes' personal account to an account opened under the name Margaret Hayes. However, that account was in fact opened and controlled by the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes. The judge nodded, his expression stern. I looked toward Clara. She lowered her head, nails digging into her palms, her face pale. Amelia continued, "Your Honor, under the Texas Elder Protection Act, the defendant's conduct constitutes elder financial exploitation and marital financial fraud. We request that the court order the defendant to return the full amount, including interest and court fees, and prohibit her from managing or accessing any financial accounts belonging to Mr. Fecht. David Hayes for the next 5 years." No one spoke. The only sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock. The judge lifted his head, his voice firm and final. After reviewing all documents, testimonies, and evidence, the court rules. The defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, shall repay the full $40,000 to Mrs. Margaret Hayes. The defendant is hereby stripped of access to, and management rights over, her husband, Mr. David Hayes's financial accounts. The defendant must also complete a mandatory 6-month financial rehabilitation program. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck 3 times, dry and cold, like the sound of a steel door closing. Clara sank into her chair. I saw her trying to keep her composure, but tears began spilling down her cheeks. She turned to David, her voice trembling. "You have to believe me. I didn't mean to." David said nothing. He just looked at her with empty eyes, then turned away. The sight made my heart crack open. I didn't feel joy, nor triumph. Only a dull ache, because to reclaim justice, I had to watch my son lose his marriage. I had once dreamed that David would be happy someday, with someone who loved and cared for him, with a warm home of his own. Now that dream had vanished, buried somewhere between the pages of a court file. Amelia placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice gentle. "You did the right thing, Margaret. You didn't just protect yourself, you saved your son." I nodded, but my lips couldn't form a smile. Justice, I realized, is a double-edged sword. It cuts through the chains of deceit, but also severs the fragile threads of family. When I left the courthouse, the sky had already turned dark gray. Rain began to fall, heavy drops splashing onto the stone steps, breaking apart into hundreds of smaller ones. I stood under the awning, looking up. The rain was cold against my skin, yet somehow I felt lighter inside. There was no applause, no cheers, no sense of victory, only the quiet peace of someone who had walked the full circle of justice. I whispered softly, as if speaking to the rain itself. "David, I don't know if you can forgive me, but at least I've held on to the one thing I could never afford to lose, the truth." The rain kept falling as I walked away step by step, leaving behind the courthouse, a place where justice had prevailed, but a mother's heart had quietly fractured. After the trial, my house returned to an eerie stillness. No more unexpected knocks on the door, no more hurried phone calls. Only the ticking of the wall clock and sunlight slipping through the curtains, lighting up tiny specks of dust floating in the air. Months passed, and David didn't call. No messages, no emails, no, "How are you, Mom?" I didn't blame him. I understood he was trying to clean up the wreckage of his marriage. Still, on quiet nights, when moonlight crossed the window pane, I often found myself holding the phone, staring at the name David Hayes in my contacts. Never pressing call, just looking, then setting it down. Being a mother, I learned, sometimes means knowing when silence is the only way to let your child grow. The restitution payment arrived one morning in June, $40,000, a sum I hadn't seen in 8 long months. I opened the email from the bank and read the words, "Deposit completed successfully." I thought I'd feel joy, but instead, I felt hollow. I sat in front of the computer for a long while, then a thought came. If that money had once been a tool of deceit, then now it had to become something good. I used a small portion to repair the roof, replace the curtains, and finally buy a proper heater. As for the rest, I reached out to Reverend Cole and Amelia. "I want to start a small foundation," I said as we sat in the parish office. "I'll call it Grace Hands Foundation. I want to help elderly people who've been financially exploited by their own children or family just like I was." Reverend Cole looked at me for a long moment, then smiled gently behind his thick glasses. "Margaret, this isn't just kindness. This is how God turns pain into the seed of something good." Amelia, ever the practical one, flipped open her notebook and began writing. "We'll register it as a non-profit. I'll handle the legal side. Reverend Cole can represent the community group. And you'll be the founder." I chuckled softly, gripping my coffee cup. "I don't want to be the founder, Amelia. I'm just a mother who learned how to stand up again." 3 months later, Grace Hands Foundation officially opened. Our first office was in the basement of St. Mary's Church, just 3 desks, an old printer, and a wooden sign carved with the words, "Helping the Forgotten, Find There. Voice Again." Each week, Reverend Cole and I met people who came to share their stories: an old woman tricked by her daughter into signing away her home, a 70-year-old man whose grandson drained his pension account, an 80-year-old widow whose signature was forged for a bank loan. Each story was a wound, but I had learned how to listen without crying. I simply held their hands and told them what I had lived, that the truth doesn't save you instantly, but it always arrives right on time. Amelia worked tirelessly reaching out to legal organizations, applying for grants, training volunteers. I oversaw what we called the heart work: listening, writing letters, comforting people, documenting their journeys. One afternoon, while tidying up the desks, Reverend Cole said quietly, "Margaret, isn't it strange? Pain has become light for others." I smiled. Maybe that's how God rewrites the ending for those who were once betrayed. As the foundation grew, reporters began to reach out. They wanted to interview the brave mother who sued her millionaire daughter-in-law. Some invited me onto talk shows. One newspaper even offered a book deal. I declined them all. I didn't want to become a story for people to gossip about. I just wanted peace. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep a wound from bleeding again, I told Amelia when she asked why I avoided the media. She nodded. "You're right. Justice can be public, but healing has to be private." At night, I developed a new ritual. I'd place a small candle on the table by the window. Its gentle glow would fall on the photo of David and me. I'd light the candle and whisper, "Where are you, David? I'm not angry. I just hope you've learned something from all this pain." The flame flickered, illuminating that old picture, David's innocent smile, the one untouched by betrayal. I touched the cold glass frame, and warmth spread through my heart. I realized forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let the wound define the rest of your life. Sometimes Reverend Cole would ask, "Margaret, have you truly forgiven her?" I'd answer, "Maybe I have, because I no longer want her to suffer. But forget? No. The betrayed can forgive but never forget." He'd smile. "You're still the strong Margaret, I know." One crisp autumn morning, while I was watering the plants on the porch, Amelia arrived with a new envelope. Our foundation just received funding from the Elder Justice Fund. They want a long-term partnership. I looked at the envelope, feeling both proud and humbled. Who would have thought a woman who once survived on canned food from the church was now helping others reclaim their dignity? I didn't cry. I simply smiled, a real, gentle smile, soft as mist. Yet, on quiet nights, I still sometimes hear the wind brushing against the door, sounding almost like my son's voice calling. I know David isn't ready yet. Maybe he's still trying to forgive himself. Maybe he's paying his penance through silence. I don't blame him. I wait not because I need him, but because I need the truth to come full circle. The truth about motherhood, trust, and a love that survives even betrayal. I believe that one day, when my son knocks on my door, I will still open it, not because I've forgotten everything, but because I've learned to love without letting myself be broken again. I light the candle, watching its flickering glow dance across the frame. Outside, the wind carries the scent of lavender into the room. I whisper, like a prayer, "My son, I don't need you to apologize. I just hope you remember this trust is the most precious gift we have, and once it's lost, it can take a lifetime to find again." The flame shrinks to a thin golden thread, but I stay there, watching until it fades completely. My heart strangely calm, because I know the storm has passed, and this stillness is mine. That night, rain poured steadily from dusk till midnight. Wind lashed against the windows, scattering the lavender pots I had brought in earlier that morning. The yellow lamp in the living room reflected on the wet glass, glimmering like fragments of the memories I'd been sorting away for months. I was sitting by the window, reviewing the donation files for next week's Grace Hands Foundation meeting, when I heard a knock, soft but insistent, carrying the chill of the storm. I looked up. It was past 10 p.m. At my age, few people knock that late unless... I walked to the door, my hand trembling as I turned the latch. The door swung open, wind rushing in, rain splattering onto my coat, and there under the downpour stood David. He was drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes red and weary. In that instant, time froze. The boy I once held in my arms, the one I taught to tie his shoelaces, now stood before me, trembling like a lost child. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been so stupid." Before I could respond, he stepped inside and sank to his knees on the wet floor. A broken sob escaped him raw, unguarded. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. And I just stood there, looking at my son, the man who once thought he understood everything, now crumbling in the very house where he was raised to value honesty. I knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "David, get up, son. Everyone stumbles. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's saving yourself." He lifted his head, tears mixing with rain, streaming down his face. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I doubted you, let her manipulate me, stayed silent while you suffered. Mom, I lost everything." I shook my head gently, guiding him to the sofa, drying his hair with a towel as I used to when he was little. Each motion was slow, tender, as if moving too fast might shatter the fragile moment of reconnection. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly. "I just need you to remember truth never arrives late. It only waits until we're brave enough to face it." He said nothing, only stared at the flickering fireplace. Outside, the rain beat against the window like the belated heartbeat of a soul waking up. After a long pause, David whispered, as if afraid of his own words, "Clara's gone, Mom." I stopped drying his hair. He continued, "She drained the savings account, took what was left from the company, and disappeared. They say she ran off with a man she'd known before we were married." I closed my eyes. No anger, no surprise, just a quiet sadness settling in, like the rain that had already accepted the end of the storm. David's voice trembled. I tried calling, texting, looking everywhere, but she vanished. She only left one message: "You trusted the wrong person." I took his hand, warm, firm. "No, son," I said. "You just realized the truth too late, but even when trust is broken, it's still what separates us from those who deceive." He rested his head on my shoulder like a child who had finally found his way home. I felt his breath, uneven but real. Then came a soft sob. "I lost everything, Mom, my career, my money, my dignity." I stroked his hair, my voice calm. "No, my son. What you found tonight is far greater the heart that knows how to admit its mistakes." The rain lasted until almost midnight. I brewed him a cup of ginger tea while he sat curled up by the fireplace. Steam rose, mingling with the scent of burning wood, filling the room with warmth. "I don't understand how you can stay so calm after everything," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "Because I know justice isn't about making someone pay, it's about restoring balance. You see, Clara reaped exactly what she sowed." He nodded, staring at the dancing flames. "I only have you left now, Mom." "No," I replied. "You still have yourself. And what you choose to do from this moment on will decide whether you truly stand again." He was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "Mom, can I help with your foundation? I want to do something meaningful. Maybe start this weekend?" I looked at him. His eyes were sincere, so much that I had to fight the swell of emotion rising in my chest. "Are you sure, son?" "Of course, Mom. I don't want to live the way I used to anymore. I want to relearn how to use money to heal instead of to hurt." I nodded. "Then come on Saturday. Reverend Cole will be happy to see you." From that day on, David came to help at the foundation every weekend. He drove in early, bringing coffee for everyone, then sat with me organizing files and writing thank you letters to donors. Some days he helped Reverend Cole move chairs. Other days, he went with Amelia to meet elderly victims and record their stories. People say time heals everything. But for me, it wasn't time, it was my son's transformation that became the real medicine. One morning, I saw him sitting at his desk, focused on fixing a spreadsheet, his brown hair glinting in the sunlight. In that moment, I saw my little David again, the boy who used to help me wash dishes, who once asked, "Mom, what does honesty mean?" I looked at him, my heart swelling with tenderness and gratitude. "David?" I called softly. He looked up. "Yeah? You've crossed your own pains, son," I said, smiling. "Not everyone has the courage to do that." He smiled faintly, a rare, genuine smile I hadn't seen in months. "If it weren't for you, Mom, I don't know how long I'd still be drowning in guilt." I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice warm. "I didn't save you, David. You saved yourself." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. I looked through the window, raindrops slid down the glass, then disappeared. The door he had once knocked on that stormy night now stood open. No more rain pouring in, only the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and lavender. In that quiet moment, I understood. Life, no matter how broken, always leaves a door open for those who wish to return. And as I watched my son smile in that sunlit room, I knew the storm had passed and peace had finally found its way home. One autumn morning, as soft sunlight spilled through the window, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank sheet of paper. The breeze carried a faint lavender scent from the porch, my favorite fragrance, gentle yet patient, a reminder of endurance. I picked up my pen. The ink flowed smoothly like breath, and the first words appeared. "Clara, thank you. Because of you, I learned the true value of honesty and the strength of self-respect." I paused, watching the ink spread faintly under the morning light. Strangely, there was no anger in me, only a quiet peace. I continued writing. "If not for you, I might still believe that truth is something obvious, that kindness is always repaid in kind. But you taught me something different. Truth only has meaning when we're brave enough to defend it. You took my money, but in return, you gave me something money could never buy: freedom." I smiled softly. My handwriting became lighter, gentler. "I don't know where you are now or if you've found peace, but if one day you read this, I want you to know, I forgave you. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to stay chained to the darkness you left behind." I set the pen down and looked at the page, now full. A letter written for no one, but written with the clarity of a heart that had once been broken and healed itself. I folded it carefully, slipped it into a cream envelope, then opened a small wooden box my late husband used to keep old birthday cards. I placed the letter inside, among family photos and a note he once wrote me. "Margaret, truth doesn't need to be shouted, only lived." I closed the box, hearing the soft, Click of wood, a sound like a chapter gently closing. In the months that followed, Grace Hand's foundation grew faster than I could have imagined. Each week, we welcomed new people. Some arrived in tears, some with messy folders, some needing nothing more than a place to finally tell the story they had buried in silence. I saw myself in them, people once deceived, once belittled, but still clinging to the belief that justice exists. And every time we helped someone reclaim their rights, I felt like I was reclaiming a fragment of my own past. One day, David stopped by the office with 2 cups of hot coffee. He sat beside me, looking around the room now filled with posters, charts, and smiling faces on thank you cards. "I can't believe how big your foundation's become," he said, his voice a mix of pride and emotion. "You really did turn pain into light." I chuckled softly, setting my cup down. "Not the light of God, my son. The light of justice. God forgives, but justice never forgets." David nodded slowly. "Maybe I'm finally learning to understand that." I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw the man he had become, not the weak one who once ran from truth, but someone who now bowed to what was right. In that moment, my heart felt as light as air. I'm no longer afraid of being poor. The days of standing in line for canned food at the church are long gone, but I don't feel shame remembering them. If anything, I'm grateful those days taught me the dignity of endurance. I've realized there's something worth far more than money: self-respect. When a person holds on to self-respect, they can't truly be defeated even when they lose everything else. Now, every morning I still wake early, brew a pot of tea, and open the windows to let the light in. Sunlight spills across the photo of my husband and me. He's wearing a white shirt, his arm around my shoulders, eyes gentle and kind. I smile at him. "If only you could see this, you'd be proud of me, wouldn't you?" If he were still alive, I know he'd smile, not because of the money I recovered, but because I kept the strength he once loved in me, the strength to never let anyone else define my worth. That evening, after David left the office, I stayed behind, opened the old journal that had followed me through this journey, and wrote the final line: "The thief is gone, but the lesson remains." I paused, looking out the window. The sky was turning pale orange, raindrops tapping softly on the roof. I heard the distant church bells ringing slow, deep, like time breathing. I closed the journal, feeling as though I'd finished a prayer. No need for revenge, no need for applause, just the peace of knowing that even in a cruel world, honesty still has a place to stand. I blew out the candle beside the photo frame. Its light dimmed, leaving a faint trace of wax in the air. And in the darkness, I whispered to myself, "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for taking everything from me so I could finally learn that the most important thing in life isn't holding on. It's learning how to rise again." A year later, Texas bloomed into spring. Lavender flourished by the porch, and the morning sky turned the soft blue of silk. I was brewing tea when the phone rang, a call from Austin. A woman's cheerful voice came through. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes? Congratulations! You've been selected as Texas Woman of the Year. The council honors those who've contributed to social justice and senior rights. We'd love for you to speak at next week's ceremony." I froze for a moment, not from pride but disbelief. A year ago, I was a 67-year-old widow living off church aid. Now, they called me a symbol of peaceful justice. Life, it seems, always finds a way to turn when you keep believing in the truth. The ceremony was held in the grand hall of the city courthouse. I chose a light blue dress, simple, like the life I now lived. No glamour, no pretense. When I stepped onto the stage, applause filled the room. Among the crowd, I saw David in the second row, wearing a white shirt, his eyes glowing with pride I hadn't seen since he was a boy. The host smiled. Mrs. Margaret Hayes, the founder of Grace Hand's Foundation, a woman who turned personal pain into a force for justice, helping dozens of seniors reclaim their dignity. I walked to the wooden podium. my hands slightly trembling but my voice steady. "Thank you," I began. "But today I'm not telling my story. I'm telling the story of an unnamed mother who was deceived by her own daughter-in-law who lost both her money and her trust." The hall went silent. Faces young and old, men and women, all leaned in. I once thought that when someone betrays you, the best revenge is silence. But I learned something else. When someone steals your trust, reclaim it with truth. No shouting, no hatred, just truth. Because truth holds a power no punishment ever could. Applause erupted long and heartfelt. I paused, taking a deep breath. From the front row, I saw David wiping his eyes. The look on his face almost broke me, not out of pity, but because I knew he finally understood. When I spoke again, my voice softened, warm and low, like a message for everyone who'd ever been broken by betrayal. Justice isn't just what happens in court. It begins the moment you find the courage to say, "Enough," even when the one who's wronged you is someone you love. That's the bravest act any mother, any father, or any human being can do. After the ceremony, there were photos, handshakes, bouquets. I don't remember all the faces, but I remember the feeling, a deep peace. No bitterness, no resentment, just quiet fulfillment. As I stepped outside, light rain began to fall. Texas skies always knew how to remind me that even in the rain, there's light. I stood under the awning, watching the drops glimmer under the streetlights, my heart lighter than ever. David came up beside me, draping his jacket over my shoulders. "Mom," he said softly, "I've never seen you shine like this." I smiled, holding his hand. "It's not because of the award, son. It's because you're here like the old days. Only now, you truly understand what honesty means." He smiled back, eyes still misty. "I do, Mom, and I promise I'll live by it." I looked up at the sky. The rain still fell, but it no longer felt cold. Inside me, a small light rose, the light of faith, of freedom, of new beginnings. That night, back home, I sat at my desk and opened my worn journal. I wrote the final line: "A mother's greatest victory isn't winning in court, it's teaching her child the value of honesty." I closed the book, listening to the wind outside, the faint scent of rain still clinging to the roof. On the table, the small candle flickered, casting a soft glow over the family photo, my husband, me, and little David. 3 faces in one frame, 3 moments in time, bound by one truth. Love never dies, it just changes form. I smiled. My life was no longer loud, rich, or grand, but it was full in its own quiet, peaceful way. And if you're still here with me listening, maybe sitting in your own quiet room tonight, I want to say this. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of my story. If you've ever faced injustice or betrayal within your own family, share your story in the comments below. I truly want to hear it, because maybe your voice today could help someone else find hope tomorrow. And if you believe, as I always have, that the truth will always find its way home, please, subscribe, and stay for the next stories. I'll tell you about women, about mothers, about those who once fell but rose again through the light of justice and compassion. From Texas, with all my gratitude and love, I'm Margaret Hayes, a mother who found happiness in her own peaceful way. If Mom doesn't sign today, I'll sign for her. My oldest son's voice sliced through the ICU like a blade, cutting across the beeps of the monitor. I lay there with the oxygen tube deep in my nose, the IV biting my wrist, watching my oldest daughter step up, lipstick cold on her mouth, placing a pen in my hand. "Just sign, Mom. Everything will be fine." My youngest daughter stood behind her brother, head bowed like she was crying, but her eyes stayed glued to the folder titled Asset Transfer and Inheritance Rights. Beside them, a stranger in a black suit opened his briefcase and set a seal on the table, ready to witness the moment they took their mother's estate. I looked at my 3 children, feeling hollow. None of them knew I had seen this day coming. I let the pen drop and heard the dry clink as metal hit the blanket. 3 faces froze at once. Because they had no idea the paper they were trying to force me to sign today was something I had made, permanently void a month ago. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Loretta Mae Ellison, 69, a widow for 12 years, living alone by Cedar Lake, a small town outside Kentucky where morning fog rests on the water and sparrows trade songs with church bells. I used to be a counseling teacher, then spent more than 2 decades building Haven Ridge Retreat, a place for women who lost their husbands, helping them find trust and peace again. I'm not rich in the usual sense, but Haven Ridge is my life's work, my years of being a mother, a wife, a woman who stood back up after grief. Now, in these later years, I thought the worst thing would be loneliness, until I realized the deepest wounds can come from people who share your last name. I woke under the cold white lights of the ICU, lines running across my arms, needles buried in my vein like creeping roots. The heart monitor blinked steadily. Each beep a reminder I was still alive, even if I wasn't sure any of my 3 children actually wanted that. At the head of the bed, Colin spoke quietly with the man in the black suit looked like a notary. I couldn't catch every word, but I knew Colin's tone, firm, transactional, the voice he used in real estate deals, not when talking to his mother. "I've prepared the forms," the man said. "Once she signs, I'll notarize immediately." Tessa, my oldest, always the organizer, set the pen in my hand, her voice gently fake. "It's just paperwork, Mom. Sign so we can handle everything for you and you won't have to stress." And Jenna, the youngest, stood at the foot of the bed, eyes rimmed red, speaking softly like comfort. "We just want you to feel at peace, Mom. It's just one signature." I looked at each of them, 3 faces that used to be my pride, now as distant as strangers. The way they stood close, traded looks, and spoke to me with half-sweet, half-cold voices told me this wasn't their first conversation about it. They had a plan. And today, I was. The final checkbox on their contract. I tried to lift my hand, but my body was weak, my fingers shaking. I felt the cold pen in my palm. "Hold it for her," someone said, probably Tessa. Another hand pressed lightly on my wrist. I heard Colin sigh, like he was waiting on a deal that had dragged on too long. Then Jenna's voice near my ear. "Just sign, Mom. This will make everything better." Her tone was sweet, but I could hear the emptiness in each word. I didn't sign. I let the pen fall. The tiny sound metal on blanket seemed to echo in the silent room. All 3 of them stopped. Colin bit his lip. Tessa frowned. Jenna looked down. The notary cleared his throat and politely closed his briefcase. No one said another word. Then Colin muttered, "What a waste of time." I watched them leave one by one. No goodbye, no hand squeeze. Just the smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping of my heart. I breathed slowly, feeling a pain in my chest that wasn't from my heart, but from somewhere else deeper, older. I once thought nothing could hurt me more than losing my husband. But today I understood, the greatest pain isn't losing the person you love, it's watching the ones you gave life to turn their backs on dignity. When the nurse came in, I pretended to sleep. I needed time to piece things together. The name Cedar Lake surfaced where I've lived nearly 30 years, where I built Haven Ridge Retreat, a place for widows. I turned it into a safe home where hundreds of women learned to stand again after loss. Haven Ridge is my life's devotion, my memories, and my husband Jack's, who passed 12 years ago. I once thought I'd pass it to my children so they could continue the work. I believed in their goodness until I realized the only thing they saw in Haven Ridge wasn't its worth, but its value on paper. A month ago, when my breath felt shorter each day, I quietly met with attorney Naomi Keats, who had helped with donations and estate matters before. I told her I feared that if I ever fell ill, My kids wouldn't ask, "Are you okay, Mom?" But what are you leaving? Naomi didn't look surprised. She just met my eyes and said, "If you want to protect what you built, do it before they realize you're still clear-minded enough to act." The next day, I signed everything to transfer Haven Ridge Retreat to the Widow's Lantern Foundation, an independent nonprofit serving women who've lost loved ones. From that moment, Haven Ridge was no longer personal property. It belonged to the people who needed it most. None of my 3 children knew. I didn't plan to tell them, at least not yet. I still hoped I could find a bit of trust in them before revealing the truth. But tonight, when I heard Colin order, "Bring the notary in," I knew my silence had saved me. After they left, I lay still for a long time. The fluorescent light cast a cold glow, my shadow pooling on the white blanket. In the steel frame's reflection, my face looked pale, older than it should. But in my own eyes, I recognized something I'd lost: resolve. I'm no longer the mother who keeps her head down, afraid to lose her children's love. I'm Loretta, the woman who built a house of peace from the wreckage of her life. And I won't let anyone turn that legacy into a bargaining chip. I turned toward the IV line, took a deep breath, and whispered through a rough throat, "Kids, I've already prepared." When the nurse returned to adjust the machines, I closed my eyes again. But my mind was sharp with every word and step I'd take once I got out. I would document everything, the times, the words, the actions of each of them, so no one could twist the story. They think I'm just a confused old woman, a name on paperwork that's easy to replace. But they forgot, I'm the one who wrote all of this, and only I have the right to write the ending. The door they think opens to treasure has been locked for a long time. I hid the key where they'd never think to look, a place called justice. And when I leave this hospital, they'll learn that what they just tried to take hasn't been theirs for a long time. That afternoon, exactly 1 month before I was in that hospital bed, the lake was still as glass. I stood at the second-floor window, where late light spread like a gold cloth over the water. The pink-red glow slid across the pines and bounced off the glass, throwing back a face I knew yet felt distant, mine, more tired than ever. At 69, I've gotten used to my body slowing down. Every morning, climbing the stairs from the office to my small apartment above, my chest felt like an invisible hand was squeezing. The light pains on the left side came more often. At first I called it fatigue. I used to teach others to listen to their bodies, and when it was my turn, I pretended I couldn't hear. I kept moving, kept working, kept being strong, like it was my job. From that room, I could see the whole of Haven Ridge Retreat, the last 20 years of my life. White-painted cottages ringed the lavender garden, a gravel porch where widows meditated or journaled every morning. At the end of the stone path was the common room, the heart of Haven Ridge, where I brewed tea, baked, and listened as they spoke of their dead. Some sat in silence an hour and then burst into tears for the husband they lost. I sat beside them, saying nothing, just holding a hand. Sometimes comfort isn't words, it's someone patient enough to sit with you. I believed Haven Ridge was my life's calling. I led so many women through their darkest days, yet in that evening light, looking over the still water, I realized I was the one who hadn't left grief. I'd lived 2 decades among tears, lost stories, and memories of Jack, who died on a snowy February morning. I built Haven Ridge to heal others, but accidentally locked myself inside a house of sorrow. I sat at the window desk and opened my laptop. The inbox overflowed, thank you notes from former guests, donor invites, financial reports, event newsletters. I skimmed past everything and stopped at drafts. One title glowed, Widow's Lantern. I'd typed it days ago and left it. The body held one sentence, I'm ready to do something that isn't about grief anymore. I don't remember why I wrote it, only that tears slid down before I noticed. Deep down, I knew I was tired of carrying everyone else's meaning, tired of being the strong one, That afternoon, Renee Porter stopped by. She's 58, Haven Ridge's director of care, the person I trust most. She set a warm box of waffles on my desk and smiled. "Working this late again? I know you haven't eaten." I brushed it off, but she didn't. She sat and looked me straight in the eye. "Loretta, I'm serious. You look weaker. Every time you climb the stairs, you grab the rail. You can't keep this up." I wanted to wave it away, say I was fine. But I saw real worry in her eyes. She lost her husband to cancer, tried to be tough the way I am now. She knows the price of caring for everyone else while forgetting yourself. She spoke slowly, like she didn't want me to fight her. "It's time to rest, Loretta. Not because you're weak, because you've done enough." I was quiet. Outside, the light tilted. The lake turned amber. I watched the willows throw shadows on the water and thought of Jack. He planted them years ago, saying they'd grow up with Haven Ridge. They're tall now, shading the path. And I, the planter, have started to slow down, to drain out. "Renee," I said softly, "if I'm not here one day, what happens to Haven Ridge?" She didn't answer right away. She set her hand on the desk and gently squeezed mine. "I don't know. But I do know that if you collapse suddenly, this place loses its soul." The words tightened my chest. I knew. Better than anyone, Haven Ridge revolved around me. I signed every decision, approved every project, held every license. I meant to build a home for community, but I'd made it dependent on one person, me. That evening after Renee left, I sat in the dim until the hallway lights clicked on. I reopened the widow's lantern draft and stared at that single sentence. Screen light lifted the lines at my eyes. Maybe it was time to let Haven Ridge become something bigger than me, beyond a mother, a widow, a worn-out founder. I didn't want it to die with me. I wanted it to live after me. When I left, I paused at the main gate. The wooden sign had darkened with age. A breeze carried lavender and damp wood. From inside came laughter, women learning joy again. I closed my eyes and let that sound pass through like a goodbye. I knew something was different that evening. Not just the light, an unmistakable feeling that a chapter was closing. In the car, sunset flared in the rearview, almost too bright. I suddenly felt this might be my last time seeing Haven Ridge this way as an owner. Next time, it would be a legacy, no longer under my name. Back at my lakeside house, the light gilded the water. Tiny waves tossed gold onto the porch. I parked but didn't shut off the engine. In that moment, I knew, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving without protecting what matters. I went inside, switched on the lamp, opened my laptop, and found Naomi Keats's number, the attorney who'd helped with last year's charitable paperwork. My cursor hovered before I called. "Loretta? I thought you'd clocked out for the day," she answered gently. "Not yet, Naomi," I said. "I'm just getting started." That night, I knew my decision was set. Under the warm desk light, I wrote one line in my notebook. "Tomorrow, I'll give Haven Ridge to the people who need it before my children take it." Outside, the night had settled. A thin moon skimmed the lake. The glow was soft but steady, just like the feeling inside me. Quiet, not weak. I knew that evening sun was the sign of a beginning. The next morning, I got to Haven Ridge earlier than usual. Fog still hugged Cedar Lake. The path in felt so still I could hear my shoes crunch the gravel. It was familiar and foreign, like walking through my own memory. Papers from the night before waited on my desk. I poured black tea, sat, and opened my contacts. Naomi's name appeared, note beneath it, Attorney Charitable and Community Assets. I took a long breath and called. "Loretta, I've been expecting you," Naomi said, warm but professional. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure," I said calmly. "I want a foundation not owned by anyone. It will carry on what Haven Ridge began." That afternoon, I drove to Naomi's office in Lexington. Autumn leaves drifted over the hood, and I thought of what's fallen from my hands in this life: my husband, my youth, and now my trust in my children. But amid the losses, there was something I could still keep meaning. Naomi greeted me with a light smile and serious eyes that felt trustworthy. She poured coffee and spread clean pages across the table. "What will we call it?" she asked. I looked out the window at the rising sun flashing on the glass. I thought of the little candle we lit at memorials in Havenridge, the one cradled by widows' hands, symbolizing hope and strength after loss. "Widow's Lantern Foundation," I said. "The flame isn't just for the dead. It's for the living learning to go on." Naomi nodded and took notes. "We worked for hours." She explained each clause: transfer of ownership, board structure, non-profit bylaws, independent authority. I listened, noted, and signed each page like a farewell to a piece of my life. 2 witnesses came: Renee Porter, my trusted colleague, and Victor Lane, our longtime accountant. Both understood the weight of this moment and stayed quiet. No, one asked why. Only Renee's glances seemed to ask, "Are you sure?" I nodded. When Naomi finished the last clause, she looked up and said clearly, "As of today, all assets, land rights, facilities, and operational authority of Havenridge Retreat are legally transferred to the Widow's Lantern Foundation. No shares remain in your name, Loretta. More importantly, none are in your children's names." I went still. It felt like a seal pressed onto my old life. I was both relieved and empty, the same feeling as when I took off my wedding ring for the last time after Jack died. Part of my heart was released, the other part knew nothing would be the same. Naomi closed the file and slid me a notarized copy. "Keep this safe. I recommend a separate storage location, physical and digital, and tell no one until you truly want to." I smiled. "I understand. Some silences protect what's right." That evening it rained lightly in Cedar Lake. I turned on the lamp, opened the wall, safe I'd had installed, and placed every document transfer papers, foundation confirmations, witness list, bylaws into a moisture-proof envelope and locked it away. Then I photographed everything and uploaded it to a private cloud folder only Naomi and I could access. Holding those papers, I thought of my 3 children. Tessa, who calls herself the best manager in the family; Colin, who sees Havenridge as an asset with growth potential; and Jenna, the gentle youngest who quietly sides with the stronger voice. I love them, maybe always will, but trust between us cracked long ago. I once thought I could tell them that forming the foundation was to protect our family's work. Then I understood. When love is mixed with greed, explanations become kindling. I didn't tell them, not out of secrecy, but because the timing wasn't safe. Some decisions, if revealed too soon, are twisted before they can take root. I reminded myself, love doesn't mean handing over unconditional power. I'd raised them with such plenty they believed everything was theirs by default. Today, I'm relearning love, clear-eyed love that protects what must be protected. At 9 p.m., I closed the laptop and leaned back. The desk lamp threw my faint reflection onto the rain-streaked window, brown silver hair, lines like a map of time. A flicker of fear. If I don't wake up tomorrow, will anyone understand I did this not out of selfishness but to safeguard value? Then I smiled. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing while fear sits beside you. I drew the curtains and listened to rain on glass. The yellow light warmed the quiet room like a promise. I wrote the day's last line in my journal. Tonight I locked the door they'll try to pry open. I'm keeping the key, not to hide, but to wait for the right knock. Before bed, I typed a short email to the interim board of the Widow's Lantern Foundation Naomi's nominees. 2. Community psychologists, an independent financial advisor, and Renee Porter. I've completed the transfer. This foundation doesn't belong to me. It belongs to those who will need it. I am the starter, not the holder. I hit send. The tiny message sent successfully banner brought a strange swell in my chest, part sorrow, part peace. Outside, the rain eased. A silver streak skimmed the lake, reflecting the porch light. I closed the door slowly, carrying a quiet I hadn't felt in years. That night, Cedar Lake drowned in mist. I stood at the window, watched water run down the glass, and told myself, from now on, Havenridge isn't mine. But it will live, and the light from the widow's lantern will go on even when I'm gone. I don't remember when I collapsed. Maybe in the office. Maybe by the kitchen doorway where I make morning tea. I only know that when I opened my eyes, the room was all harsh white light, steady beeps, and the sharp smell of disinfectant, like waking inside a cold dream. I wanted to ask what happened, but my throat burned and only a rasp came out. A young nurse noticed I was awake and ran to get the doctor. They said things like transient cardiac ischemia, a few days of monitoring, lucky it wasn't too late. I nodded so they'd be at ease, but my mind was on something else. Do my kids know I'm here? The answer came fast. That afternoon, the door swung open. 3 familiar faces, Colin, Tessa, Jenna. With them, a stranger in a black suit carrying a leather case. "Oh my, Mom, you're awake!" Tessa blurted, half surprised, half awkward. She set a tiny bouquet on the table, but I saw it was plastic, the kind you grab from the gift shop by the elevators. "The doctor says you're past the danger point," Colin said, voice hard like a revenue report. "But you need to rest and avoid stress, so it's best we settle everything now." I squinted. "Settle what?" Jenna slid a chair close, holding my hand, her voice small. "Just a little paperwork, Mom. We'll help manage Havenridge so you won't face legal issues." Before I could respond, Colin signaled to the man to open the case. The metal latch clicked cold as ice. A thick stack landed on the bedside table. "This is a temporary power of attorney," Colin said. "Sign, and we'll handle the banks, donors, and agencies. You won't have to worry." I stared at the page's tiny print, signature tabs already marked. My eyes blurred, but instinct made me sharper than ever. This wasn't temporary. It was permanent. We should do it quickly. "Mom's weak," Tessa coaxed, voice so persuasive it felt foreign. "The notary is here. It'll take minutes." The man nodded. I felt the IV pinch, my throat close. The heart rate on the monitor ticked like a warning. I tried to speak, but couldn't. My breath caught. My hand went numb. Colin lowered his voice to the girls. "Just get it done. She can't fight it. If we don't do it now, later will be too late." Tessa pressed the pen into my hand. "Just sign, Mom. You've worked your whole life. Let us take it from here." Jenna leaned closer, sweetness turning false. "Sign, Mom, so you can relax." I heard every word, every breath. My 3 kids, the ones who once argued over slices of my pie and called me a superhero when I kept us afloat after their dad died, now stood here not to care for me, but to take. I tried to lift my hand and only managed to hold the pen loosely. I felt a sting at the IV site and a chill rushing up my arm. Through the haze, I heard Tessa murmur, "Hold Mom's hand steady." Jenna's hand landed on my wrist, soft but firm. Colin stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, eyes indifferent. I let the pen fall. A small, dry click on white fabric. No one spoke for a few seconds. The air felt sucked out of the room. Colin inhaled hard and dropped a flat line. "Fine. If you don't want to, then rest. But don't say we didn't take care of things." Tessa picked up the pen and slipped it into her purse. She said, "Let's go," without looking back. Jenna was the last to step out, gently closing the door. I saw her lashes tremble, but I couldn't tell if it was from nerves or guilt. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone under the cold white lights and the steady beeps of the heart monitor. No scent of flowers, only antiseptic. I lay still as tears burned down my temples. I wasn't crying from weakness. I cried because I had seen this coming, and I had prepared for it. 3 days later, I could sit up. They removed the oxygen tube. A nurse helped me practice breathing and eat thin porridge. My body still hurt, but my mind was strangely clear. I asked to borrow a phone to call family, but I really wanted to call Renee. When she heard my voice, she froze. "Oh my God, Loretta, I just heard you got sick." And before I could get there, Colin called the office this morning. I gripped the phone. "What did he say?" "He said you're not well enough to work and that you agreed to let him temporarily run Haven Ridge. He said staff might need to help sign a few things while you recover." I closed my eyes and breathed deep. Anger rose, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I just felt sorry for the blindness that greed can plant in the children you raised. "Renee," I said softly, "I want everything left as is. No transfers, no new accounts, no one enters the office without me, okay?" "Of course," she answered quickly, firm. "I'll tell accounting and the team. They only take direction from you." I smiled weakly. "Thank you. And one more thing, remember, Haven Ridge isn't mine anymore. It belongs to the Widow's Lantern Foundation. All documents were transferred 3 weeks ago." There was a pause, then Renee gave a small laugh. "So you already did it. I had a feeling." "Yeah, I said. I just didn't think I'd see this day so soon." After the call, I asked the nurse to bring my handbag from the locker. I took out my phone and opened my private cloud folder. Everything was intact: signed PDFs, confirmation minutes, notarized copies. I opened a new note and typed slowly. June 4th, ICU. Colin brought a notary. Tessa assisted. Jenna present. Tried to force a power of attorney while patient on IV, not fully capable. I did not sign. No consent. No legal authorization. I saved the file, titled it ICU Forced Signature, and uploaded a copy to my backup cloud. Then I attached it to an email and sent it to Renee with the subject line, "In case needed." I set the phone down, leaned back on the pillow, and breathed deep. In the quiet room, I could hear the rain on the window and my heart beat slow, steady. I wasn't a woman lost in illness anymore. I had recorded my first piece of evidence, a legal fence strong enough to protect what I've built. I stared at the ceiling, the fluorescent light glinting off the IV line. Everything looked white, but inside me, a different light was growing. I knew that from this moment on, their efforts would be pointless. The door they're trying to open, I locked it long ago with keys called Law and Clarity. And I swore that once I left this room, I would never let anyone sign for me, never again. 3 days later, the doctor signed my discharge. He spoke gently but firmly. "Mrs. Loretta, your heart almost stopped. If you stay under stress or hide symptoms again, you won't be this lucky next time." I only smiled. To me, it wasn't an accident, it was a wake-up call. My body spoke before my spirit collapsed. Renee picked me up in her old silver car. She climbed out with my wool cardigan I'd left at the office and a small paper bag with hot soup, chamomile tea, and a few cookies. Seeing it made my heart sink, a simple care that didn't demand repayment. No contract, no terms, no signature. Just honest kindness. On the drive back to Cedar Lake, we barely spoke. Fog hung thick, catching the weak sunlight on every branch. I sat in the back seat, holding my medical file tight. The engine's hum was lulling, but my mind couldn't rest. In those 3 ICU days, I had repeated a list in my head what to do once I got home. When the car stopped at my house, I took a long breath. The small lakeside home was as quiet as the day I left, except the wind carried the damp smell of early autumn leaves. Renee helped me in, made tea, and reminded me, "Rest and don't touch work." I nodded, thanked her, waited for her to clear the driveway, then locked the door and pulled the key. The first thing I did wasn't rest. I went straight to the living room, bent down, and opened the cabinet under the bookshelf where the backup safe was hidden. The code still worked. When the soft click sounded, I almost held my breath. Inside, the original deeds transferring. Haven Ridge to the Widow's Lantern Foundation were stacked neatly, along with 2 witness confirmations and minutes from the interim board meeting. Nothing had moved. I carefully photographed each page, numbered them, and saved them to a hard drive in a separate cloud only Naomi Keats and I could access. Then I put everything back and locked the safe with a new code. This time I added another character, one more layer of comfort. I stood and looked around. Everything familiar, yet distant. This home once echoed with my kids' voices at Christmas. Now only wind slipped through the doorframe. I sat on the sofa and checked my phone. 3 new messages. Tessa, rest up, Mom, don't overthink. I'll visit soon. Colin, let's talk this weekend, Mom. A few things need your confirmation. Jenna, not a word. I stared at the 3 lines, and a chill ran through me. Each text sounded caring, but I heard the voice of interest and the patience of a plan not yet complete. I set the phone down and poured more tea. The chamomile rose light and sweet, but it couldn't lift the weight in my chest. That afternoon, I opened my laptop to check the work inbox. Hundreds of unread emails. One subject jumped out. Legal advisory appointment confirmation. I opened it. My heart thudded. It read, appointment between Loretta Ellison and legal advisor for Haven Ridge Retreat confirmed for 10 o'clock Friday morning. Below it was an electronic signature from Colin. He had impersonated me. Attached was a draft temporary power of attorney, the same thing I refused to sign in the ICU. Maybe any parent knows the unique pain of being betrayed by your own child. I still ask myself, do you believe love has limits? Tell me how you feel in the comments. I read each one like a new chapter in this life. I closed my eyes, counted to 3, and opened them again. No trembling, no fear, just a cold clarity. I hit forward and sent it to the entire interim board of the Widow's Lantern Foundation. In the body, I wrote, please reconfirm the governance structure. As of May 12th, all management authority for Haven Ridge Retreat belongs solely to the Widow's Lantern Foundation. No member of my family holds any position or legal authority. Any requests or contacts contrary to policy should be reported to me and attorney Naomi Keats. I attached the organizational charter, signed electronically, and sent it. When message sent successfully appeared, I exhaled. Once more, the door they tried to pry shut itself tighter. Evening came on. Late light streamed through the window onto the wooden table where I keep my old notebook. The cover was worn, the first pages still stained with old coffee. I opened it and wrote, clearly, June 4th ICU. Colin called a notary, brought power of attorney papers. Tessa assisted. Jenna stood by. They said Mom should sign for peace of mind. I did not sign. Then Colin left, irritated. Tessa packed the files. Jenna said nothing. All remembered. I paused, dotted the page, then added, I never thought I'd have to write this. But it's necessary to protect the truth if I can't speak. I closed the notebook, pulled a separate page, an action list, and numbered it. 1. Call Naomi Keats, confirm Haven Ridge's legal status. 2. Notify the board about Colin's impersonation. 3. Contact installers, set up a home camera system. 4. Update medical directive, remove decision rights from the kids. 5. Change emergency contact to Renee and Naomi. 6. Cancel the old power of attorney I granted years ago. Each time I finished a line, I drew a firm stroke through it. It felt like locking every door and sealing every gap they might slip through. I worked until dark, the warm lamp spreading a soft band across the table. Outside, the lake caught the distant glow of neighbors' lights. I stood, pulled the curtains, and saw my reflection in the glass, small but steady. Before bed, I wrote another letter by hand. Thick cream paper, my handwriting shaky but clear. Dear Naomi, if one day I lose capacity, open this envelope. Inside are journals, notes, and legal evidence of my children's recent actions. I trust you to protect the truth. Sincerely, Loretta M. Ellison. I sealed it and wrote on the front, open only if Loretta loses capacity. I placed it in the wall safe with a copy of my ID and an asset list. Done. I turned off the lights, leaving a small one on the bookshelf. In the quiet house, the ticking clock sounded like the heartbeat of resolve. I wrapped myself in the cardigan Renee brought and sat by the window, looking out at the dark lake. Everything seemed asleep, but I knew the real fight had just begun. And this time, I would not fight with tears, but with evidence, with the law, and with the calm of a mother who used to trust too easily and has finally learned to trust herself. That Sunday, the Cedar Lake sky was cold and gray, no sun, just a breeze through the pines by the porch. I just poured tea when I heard an engine settle in the driveway, the low growl of a black SUV, the kind Colin uses for important meetings. My heart beat slow, not surprised. I knew the vague discussion from their weekend texts had arrived. The engine cut, doors opened in near unison. Colin stepped out first, white shirt buttoned to the collar, dark suit, shoes polished to a mirror in the dim noon light. He adjusted his tie, the habit he has before a deal. With Colin, everything is transactional, including family. Behind him came Tessa, hair in a tight bun, sunglasses covering half her face, though there was no sun. On her left was Jenna, the youngest, carrying a reusable water bottle, soft sweater, expression calm to the point of artificial. Watching them approach my door felt less like a visit to Mom and more like a shareholders' meeting. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said evenly. Colin walked straight in without a greeting. Tessa pressed her lips together. Jenna tried a stiff smile. They sat on the sofa while I stayed standing, keeping distance. "We need to talk," Colin began, placing a navy folder on the coffee table and sliding it toward me with a deliberate calm. "Just a few items to review: power of attorney, medical decision rights, co-managed accounts, and a shared benefit structure for Haven Ridge. We've organized everything." I looked at the stack and didn't touch it. Light from the window flashed off the cover stamped "Legal Draft." I didn't need to open it to know what was inside a replay of what they tried in the hospital. Tessa leaned in, voice smooth like a presentation. "This is just temporary, so things stay stable. If it feels unnecessary later, you can revoke it." Jenna, beside her, dipped her head and added softly, "If you sign, everyone can relax. I know you're tired, but this is for everyone's good." I stayed silent. In that moment, I could hear the wall clock tick, each second dropping into the air. I reached out and pulled the folder close, opened the first tab. Dense legal phrases stared back: durable power of attorney, shared asset authorization, healthcare decision rights highlighted in yellow, ready for a signature. I turned each page slowly. It felt like reading an indictment written by my own children. At the last page, I closed it, set it back where it was, and said plainly, "No." Colin arched a brow. "You haven't read it fully." "I've read enough," I said, calm, low, but clear. "The answer is no." The room froze. Tessa glanced at Colin, signaling. He leaned back and shifted tone. "I don't think you're fully clear-headed. The doctor said you need rest and no stress. Are you sure you understand everything that's happening?" I looked him in the eye. "I'm clear enough to know trust has broken, and once it's broken, no. Paperwork fixes it." Jenna squeezed her bottle and stared down. Tessa exhaled sharply, trying to stay composed, fingers rubbing the purse edge, eyes unsteady. Colin braced his elbows on his knees, leaning toward me. "I don't want to argue, but you're making this harder. This is about Haven Ridge, the family's asset. If you keep this stance, I'll have to find another way to protect it. Understood?" I answered slowly, each word touching the air. "Colin, Havenridge doesn't need protection from me. It needs protection from my children's greed." Silence fell. Outside, a draft lifted the curtain. I stood and walked to the door. "This conversation ends here," I said, hand on the knob. "If you truly want to care for me, start by respecting my answer." Tessa shot up. "You're just pushing us away. You've changed." "You're not the mom I knew." I turned back, eyes gentle but firm. "Maybe you never knew who I really was. You only knew the mother who yielded, nodded, and endured. She's gone." The room went quiet. Jenna leaned forward like she might speak, then stopped. Colin grabbed his briefcase, face set like stone. Through his teeth, he said, "We won't give up." I nodded lightly. "I know." Then I opened the door. My 3 children walked out without looking back. The door shut with a small, dry click that echoed. A boundary had been drawn between love and control, between the mother they were used to and the woman they can't bend. I stood a few seconds with my hand on the knob, listening as the SUV's engine faded down the leaf-strewn road. When the sound was gone, I let go and headed to the kitchen. On the counter, my morning tea had gone cold. I added hot water. The scent rose and drifted into the quiet. With both hands around the mug, I noticed they were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in years, they trembled with relief. Not relief from winning, but from choosing my voice over. Compliance. I no longer needed to keep the peace, no longer needed to use endurance as a shield. I sat and looked out the window. Cedar Lake mirrored thin clouds. Nothing outside had changed, but I knew everything inside me had. I had stepped across a line, not loud, not dramatic, just a steady no strong enough to reclaim the rest of my life. And sometimes a woman's greatest strength isn't in the shout, it's in the moment she smiles and looks straight at the people telling her to be quiet. Last Sunday was the boundary line, and Monday morning the mailman brought the first strike. On the porch lay a large white envelope stamped with the law firm Colin likes to hire. I used a letter opener. Inside, an emergency petition for guardianship filed in County Family Court. Petitioner, Colin Ellison. Supporter, Tessa. Witness, Jenna. The summary was cold as stone. "Mrs. Loretta is unstable, easily influenced, needs a representative." I read it all, closed it, and set it on the table like closing a door. I didn't call the kids. I dialed Naomi Keats. "Loretta, I expected this," Naomi said evenly. "We respond now." "I don't want a circus," I said, "but I won't hand myself to greed." "Then we use facts," she replied. "Start with a timeline." That afternoon, I brought my notebook, phone, and a box of files to Naomi's office. On the glass board, she wrote key points: ICU, June 4th, impersonation email, Havenridge transfer May 12th, cameras 2 weeks ago. I provided the texts: Tessa's "Rest up," Colin's "Talk this weekend," and Jenna's silence. Naomi nodded. Silence, after a forced signature attempt, is still data. We pulled images of the originals, transfer deeds, witness confirmations. I opened the cloud note. ICU force signature. Colin brought a notary. Tessa assisted. Jenna present. Patient on IV. No signature. Naomi asked me to write a first-person statement describing sounds, words, feelings. "Courts don't just read statutes," she said. "They read people." The next day, Naomi contacted Havenridge. Renee sent gate camera footage. Colin tried to badge into operations and was stopped by security. We numbered, time-stamped, and indexed the exhibits. Naomi concluded, "The strategy is to show a systematic manipulation pattern: impersonation, staging, exploiting illness, attempted facility access." I nodded, heart steadying. I got home late. On the porch sat a tray of banana bread wrapped in parchment with a note: "Eat and rest. I stopped by but missed you. Jenna. The smell of ripe banana, butter, and cinnamon pulled me back to when she baked with me. I didn't open the door. I didn't text back. I set the tray in the kitchen and covered it. Love isn't dead, but it no longer drives my decisions. That night I wrote a small declaration in my journal, saying no isn't cruel, saying no is building a fence around the replay day, a heart so love isn't used as a shortcut to the vault. When I set down the pen, my breath felt lighter. In the days that followed, we sprinted. Naomi prepared a thick response, a motion to dismiss, a statement from my cardiologist, confirming capacity, the new medical directive, my cancellation of the old power of attorney, a letter from the Widow's Lantern Board confirming governance, and the full digital log. I checked every error, questioned every comma. Naomi smiled. I appreciate your precision. Friday afternoon, the response was filed. On the courthouse steps, Naomi said, "From here, you shift from defense to offense. They shoved us onto the field. Now we choose the rules." The words clicked a latch in my chest. That weekend, I cleaned house like a recovery ritual. I gathered old magazines, reset picture frames, wiped sills, each drawer arranged like an argument. Orderly, clear, no room for clutter. I opened windows to let fall air in, damp wood mixing with lemon. Oil. I brought in the wind chimes. I no longer needed to fill the silence with noise. At night, I didn't stand guard. Passing cars didn't startle me. Shadows across the lawn didn't send me to the curtains. Under warm light, I reread our filing, holding it like a map. I know where I am and where I'm going. Sunday morning, I carried the bread to the porch. The top had dried, but the scent remained. I cut a slice and brewed tea. I wasn't angry at Jenna, just sad she stood on the fence so long. Sad but not weak. I bagged the rest and texted Renee, "Pick up when you can, give to the night shift." I don't eat much sugar. An hour later, the tray was gone, with a note left behind. Got it. R. At noon, Naomi called. Court received it. Preliminary hearing next week. I'll send the schedule. I thanked her and set the phone down. Out in the yard, I clipped lavender and set it in a chipped ceramic vase. The scent filled the kitchen and seeped down the hall. I understood that for years I fed life in others while forgetting to feed life in my own home. Toward evening, I dragged an old cedar chest to the center of the living room. Inside, Jack's letters, cassette tapes of the kids singing, receipts from Haven Ridge's opening days. I didn't burn or toss them. I organized, tied fresh ribbon, and labeled, "Keep not for bargaining. Keep what needs keeping. Let go of the rest. That's how I'll live again." The sun dropped behind the pines, the house washed in a soft blue. I flipped on the porch light, its glow falling across the gray stone path. I realized I wasn't afraid of footsteps anymore. If anyone comes, this door opens on my terms. Inside, there is order. Inside, there is a fence. Night settled. I sat at the table and wrote one more line. I won't prove anything with tears. I'll prove it with timestamps, names, signatures. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for respect. My peace doesn't hang on someone else's mood. Wind drifted off the lake. I closed the journal and dimmed the lights, leaving one in the kitchen. That small glow pushed back just enough dark like the widow's lantern I named the foundation after. I walked room to room, touching the wood, listening to the house breathe. In that rhythm, I knew I'd left the fragile shore and stepped onto the solid one. The next morning, the mailman knocked again. No heavy envelope this time, just ads. I brewed tea and opened a window. The Cedar Lake sky was clearer than usual. In my chest, space opened not to run, but to move forward. That morning, the sky over Cedar Lake was startlingly clear. I stood at the mirror and smoothed the sleeves of my navy coat, the one I wore at those first Haven Ridge fundraisers, when I could drive across 3 states to raise support for widows with nowhere to go. I chose it not to look strong, but to remember who I am, the woman who once stood at a podium and spoke plainly about value, trust, and how a woman can rebuild her life with two trembling hands. The county courthouse sits downtown, a small red brick building with an old dome. Inside, early light streamed through tall windows and lay across the wooden benches like a thin layer of time. I walked slowly, each step treading on years of wounds caused by my own kin. Colin was already there with his attorney, dark suit, composed face like he was the one responsible for everything. Tessa sat beside him, flipping through files. Jenna kept her head down, fingers intertwined, avoiding my eyes. I took a breath and sat across from them next to Naomi. "You okay?" she whispered. "I am," I said. "I just want to hear everything clearly this time and not let anyone speak over my voice." When the judge entered, everyone stood. She was a woman in her early 60s, gray hair in a neat bun, eyes stern but not cold. Her voice was soft yet firm. Temporary guardianship, hearing the matter of Colin Ellison versus Loretta Mae Ellison. On the other side, Colin's attorney stood first and opened the file. His voice was smooth, precise, with a hint of fake regret. "Your Honor, my client only wants to protect his mother. Recently, she has shown signs of cognitive decline and is easily influenced by outsiders, especially Havenridge staff. Her decision to transfer all assets to a non-profit run by others indicates impaired judgment." Each word "decline," easily influenced, dropped and made my chest heavier, but my face stayed calm. I didn't need to argue with emotion. I only needed the facts. When it was our turn, Naomi rose. She didn't raise her voice. She just opened each file and presented them in order. "Your Honor, we submit medical records from Cedar Lake Hospital confirming that Mrs. Loretta has no signs of cognitive disorder. Her cardiac condition is stable, and her reflexes and logical reasoning are fully intact." She pulled up a slide on the small screen. A photo of me in the ICU with an IV, and at the bedside, Colin and two women images taken from the hospital camera. She continued, steady. "We are also submitting notes, Mrs. Loretta recorded herself, auto-saved to the cloud at the time of the incident. It states, Colin brought a notary, tried to force a power of attorney while the patient was on an IV, no consent." A small camera click sounded from the back row. I glanced at my son, his face unchanged, but his hands were clenched, knuckles white. Naomi moved to the third piece of evidence. Security footage at Havenridge on May 22nd shows Mr. Colin Ellison attempting to use an employee badge to enter the administrative area despite having his access revoked. "We have a written security report." She paused, then unfolded a sheet of paper and read each word clearly. "From Mrs. Loretta's letter to the Widow's Lantern Foundation board. The court doesn't need to protect me from strangers but from my play. Family's illusion of inheritance rights." The courtroom went silent. Only the judge's pen tapped the bench. I saw Jenna turn away, her shoulders trembling slightly. Tessa sat straighter, lips pressed tight, and Colin stared at the table like a man calculating his next move. The judge signaled for me to stand. "Mrs. Loretta, would you like to speak before we recess for deliberation?" I stood with my hands lightly clasped, steadying myself. The room felt smaller, only breath and heartbeat left. I spoke slowly, each sentence clear. "I didn't come here to fight over anything. I only want the peace I worked my whole life to have. I am clear-minded. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't need anyone to decide for me. I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being lived for by people who no longer see me as a person, but as an inheritance." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the wood-paneled room. The judge looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Loretta." She called a brief recess and then announced, "The court will recess to review all evidence. A written ruling will be issued in the coming days." When the gavel tapped softly, I drew a deep breath. I didn't feel victorious, and I didn't feel afraid. I just felt steady in the truest sense. Not standing on arguments, but on my own name. Across the aisle, Colin packed his files without a word. Tessa avoided my eyes. Jenna walked slowly behind them, glancing back once eyes wet, half wanting to speak, half afraid to. I gave a small nod. No hatred, no blame. I knew I couldn't save people who don't want to wake up. Outside, noon light fell across the brick walkway. Naomi walked beside me in silence until we reached the lot. She set a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Whatever the outcome, you reclaimed your name today." I smiled. "And that name," I said, "won't be used to sign for anyone else again." 2 days later, the mailman came again. This time the envelope was thicker, but it didn't feel threatening. I sat at the kitchen table, poured tea, and opened it slowly. Cedar Lake County Court Notice of Ruling. After reviewing all evidence, the petitioner's emergency guardianship request is denied in full. The court notes indications of financial manipulation by involved individuals and refers the matter to civil authorities for further investigation. I set the letter on the table and watched the steam rise from my tea. No gloating, no tension, just a thin but true line of peace running through me. I murmured to myself, "No one can give you your freedom back if you don't unlock it yourself." Midday light came through the window and fell across the page with my name in bold, no strike-throughs, no footnotes. I ran a hand over the words, Loretta Mae Ellison. For the first time in months, I felt my name whole again, not in a complaint, not on a power of attorney form, not in a guardianship file, but in my actual life. I folded the letter and set it beside the warm cup. The mist of steam mixed with the early afternoon light, so light it was almost transparent. I knew the fight wasn't entirely over, but I had won the most important part. I was no longer a victim of my own blind love. I decided not to cancel Legacy Evening, the event I'd scheduled to honor those who had walked with Havenridge, but I changed the guest list. No Ellison name tags, and no donors who like posing with oversized checks. I pulled out my old address book, made calls, and handwrote invites to people who'd been overlooked when Havenridge got too glossy, the high school teachers in town, the retired nurses who once asked to borrow the common room for a support group but were turned away for not meeting criteria, the shelter coordinator for abused women, the one who emailed me 4 times and then gave up. On each card, I wrote the same line in a slightly shaky blue ink. Havenridge is no longer my family's asset. It belongs to those who need it. Hope to see you at Legacy Evening. Some called back right away, voices trembling with disbelief. Others sent a simple, "Thank you for remembering us," and some were silent for days before replying, as if they needed time to believe that a long-closed door had opened. I didn't push. A good door is one people choose to walk through. News of the ruling spread faster than I expected. Colin found out by late afternoon. 3 days before the event, he stood at the top of my driveway, hands in his pockets, no car, no briefcase, just a rare pale look. I opened the door and stood on the porch. He didn't ask to come in. "I want to ask one thing," he said, staring at a slash of sunlight on the step. "Are you throwing away our family's shared vision?" I answered, "Our family never had a shared vision for Havenridge, Colin. You had a vision of assets. I had a vision of meaning." I paused, then said slowly, "I no longer confuse love with blind loyalty. I did for too long." Colin pressed his lips until I could see his jaw go tight. He said nothing more, and turned away like a man who'd missed his train. I watched his shadow stretch across the grass, then break as he turned the corner. I felt no triumph, only calm, as if we had finally spoken in our real language. The language of boundaries. On Legacy Evening, a soft wind moved over Cedar Lake. I arrived early to check the steel frame greenhouse out back where I wanted dinner to be. String lights looped above, reflecting in small glints on a long table draped in a sandy linen cloth. We laid out simple china and a well-worn set of flatware. No elaborate flowers, just a few sprigs of lavender and rosemary in rinsed jam jars. On each plate I placed a small handwritten note, "You belong here." It was almost blunt in its simplicity, but I wanted it unconditional. I've seen too many doors that say, "Welcome," with lines of fine print underneath. If, as long as, on the condition that Haven Ridge had been like that at times. Tonight I corrected it with one short sentence. Guests trickled in, then filled the room. A silver-haired teacher arrived with a boy whose chin carried a long scar. I remembered him nodding off in the meditation room after a week without a place to sleep. A retired nurse came with a cane and chose a chair near the window. The shelter coordinator came late, out of breath but smiling. "Thank you for the invitation and for the acknowledgement. No family names on the list." I opened one door and closed another. When everyone was seated, I stepped to the small mic at the head of the table. I hadn't prepared a speech. I only knew there was one thing I needed to say, clearly. "Tonight," I began, "isn't to tally credit or blame, isn't to brag about what Haven Ridge has done or excuse what it hasn't. Tonight is so I can finally say what I should have said long ago. Haven Ridge is no longer my family's." The greenhouse went so quiet I could hear a draft slip under the door. I opened a brown envelope and took out the transfer deed and a fresh confirmation letter. My voice didn't shake. I officially announce the land and facilities of Haven Ridge have been transferred to the Cedar Lake Community Trust, an independent community fund. No inheritance, no reversal. No fine print, no back door. From today on, the key holder is this community. For a few seconds, nobody clapped. Not because they weren't glad, because respect rarely makes noise. Then slowly, one person stood. Then a second, a third. They didn't cheer or shout my name. They just stood with damp eyes and hands at their sides, as if greeting something that had been taken from them for too long. I bowed my head. I didn't need anything more. Dinner moved gently after that. Pumpkin soup, toasted bread, apple salad, simple dishes meant for sharing. I walked the aisles, nodding and touching the shoulders of people who had come to Haven Ridge on very hard days. A mailman told me his wife once sat upstairs in the library and read aloud their son's last letter from the service. A grandmother raising 2 grandkids said sometimes all she needed was a place to sit and cry without someone rushing a tissue into her hand to make her stop. In that moment I understood. I hadn't abandoned Haven Ridge. I had returned it to its rightful owners. When most guests had gone, I took one last walk to say goodbye to Haven Ridge, not the building, but the old version of myself there. I went into the library, low shelves, paper and pine. I rested my hand on the spine of On Grief and Grieving, remembering the line, "Loss isn't something to get over, it's something we learn to carry." I went down to the meditation room, gray mats, the sound of wind against glass. I sat on the floor, closed my eyes, and listened to my heartbeat. Then I climbed the wooden stairs, the ones that creaked every morning when I carried a hot mug past. The hall light cast a long yellow strip like a road from youth to now. "Thank you," I whispered as if to a friend. I turned out most of the lights and locked the door. The new keys belonged to the Cedar Lake Community Trust, but tonight I was the one to close up, just once more. Back home, the porch light fell across the kitchen counter. A small sealed envelope sat there with no name. I opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper, Tessa's handwriting clear but hesitant. "I don't understand. Maybe I can't yet, but I'm sorry. No long explanation, no defense. Just 3 words that meant what they meant." I leaned against the counter and read it a few times. The pain didn't vanish, but its hard edge softened. I folded the note and put it in the 3rd drawer, the one for not to decide today. Not forgiving yet, but hurting less. I poured a glass of water and looked out at the lake. The quiet was clean, like rain had washed a film of dust from the porch. I turned off the kitchen light and left a small one by the window, the old habit that says the house is awake for those who need it. But tonight I knew that light wasn't for my kids to come back and take something, it was to light the next part of my life, living without debt to anyone's expectations. I sat by the window and opened my notebook. The last line of the day flowed easily without the catch of the past weeks. Haven Ridge has gone back to the people who need it. I've gone back to myself. I closed the book and listened to the house breathe slow and deep. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a faint trace of lavender from my coat. I rested my head and knew that from here on, I didn't have to guard a gate. My work was to plant a garden again in the house, in my mind, in ordinary mornings. And that night, for the first time in months, sleep came as lightly as a letter with no conditions. A few days after Legacy Evening, the mailman knocked again. No law firm envelope, no court seal, just a cream-colored letter, corners a little curled like it had ridden in many pockets. I looked at the addressee, Loretta May Ellison, then turned it over. Colin. My hand paused. I pulled out a chair, poured tea, and opened it slowly so the paper wouldn't tear, as if one rough move might break whatever thin thing sat inside. Mom, I saw the transfer files earlier through public records and a few conversations around the cafe near the foundation building. I thought you would change your mind like before. I waited for you to give in. I trusted that habit more than I trusted you. Today I understand. You have the right to do what you believe is right, even if there's no place for me in it. I'm not asking for anything. I'm only acknowledging you're right. Colin. No, I'm sorry. No, please forgive me. Just a blunt, almost awkward, acknowledgement that I have the right. I folded the letter and set it by my tea. Outside, the lake rippled lightly. I didn't cry. Maybe because my tears had turned into a different kind of quiet, a quiet with firm edges, the kind that knows the difference between genuine feeling and an attempt to steer the story. I called Renee and recited it line by line. She was silent for a moment, then said, Tessa stopped by Haven Ridge last night. Didn't ask to go into the office, just stood outside the glass. I opened the door and she said, No, I just want to stand here a minute. She talked less than usual. I think something settled. Our hearts need a solid bottom to stand on before we can say decent things, I said. We didn't dissect it further. I shifted to Joyce's new pottery class for elder caregivers, a 65-year-old woman leading it. Renee's voice warmed. They're calling it a weekly pot-making night, not therapy. If you're free Friday, come. Bye. I laughed. I will. I do have days now with no meetings. That afternoon I went to the Haven Ridge community room, the one I'd walked through 1,000 times with a to-do list nailed into my brain. Today I sat in the back row with no role, no title, just a woman who wanted to listen. In front, a gray-haired woman rested her hands on her knees and began. She divorced after 30 years of marriage. No sobbing, no rage, just a voice smoothed by weather. Husband gone, kids chose silence, friends thinned like fog. I thought I'd die of loneliness, she said, but I didn't. And one morning I realized the kitchen still had room for a wooden spoon hitting a pan, like the pan was telling me, cook anyway. If no one eats today, then eat it tomorrow. When our eyes met by chance, I nodded. She nodded back, understanding without words. In that nod, I heard a hinge open a little inside me. No fanfare, no trumpets, just accepting that breathing is an act too. The greed. Next day, I walked the lake trail. I used to rush at fast steps, eyes on the watch, counting minutes until I had to be at the office, mind sorting the to-dos. This morning I slowed, stopped by petunias still holding dew, listened to ducks call under the dock, watched the sunlight powder the water like cinnamon on a latte. I thought, maybe I grew old here, but I'm also growing young here, in the way of people no longer crushed by meeting schedules. Back home, I pulled a sticky note from the drawer, wrote with a black marker, and stuck it on the fridge. "I am not an asset to be managed." I chuckled. Funny how a line in court can feel cold as steel, but on a fridge it warms up like butter melting in a pan. Maybe that's because the kitchen is where we begin again, where we feed life instead of managing it. At noon, I sat by the window and opened my journal. I wrote the chapter I'd avoided, learning to be alone without being lonely. I didn't lecture, just noted. Small footprints. Brew a pot of tea just for me, but pour it in a pretty cup like when guests are here. Play Jack's old music. Don't rush to turn it off when memory stings. Allow myself not to reply right away, even to kind messages. Replant 3 rosemary bushes, not to cook more, but to rub the leaves and remember I still have sense to live by. Walk the lake every day. No 2 laps need to be the same. I wrote until my hand tired, then leaned back. In the quiet, I notice the sadness still echoes. It passes through the living room, bounces off the glass, even slips into the drawer with Tessa's envelope, but it doesn't run the house anymore. It's a guest who now wipes its feet, sits on the edge of the chair, and leaves on time. At dusk, my phone buzzed. Renee sent a photo. Women laughing, hands covered in clay. She typed, "Joyce says every pot keeps the maker's mistake on purpose. The flaw stays to remind you this vessel came from your own hands." I snapped a picture of the fridge and sent it back, the note that says, "I am not an asset to be managed." Renee hearted it, then called, "Coming to pottery tomorrow?" "I am," I said. "I want to make a pot with my own mistake in it." That night I roasted honey, carrots, and salmon, the simplest dish I know. I plated it on china and tucked a rosemary sprig on top, like I used to when guests came. Then I served myself, ate, and cleaned up. It had been a long time since the house had someone eating dinner without needing to talk about anything important. Before bed, I slid open the 3rd drawer and reread Tessa's note. "I don't understand. Maybe I can't yet, but I'm sorry." This time, "I'm sorry," didn't prick like a needle. It touched and left a small, warm trace. I put it back, the "not today, things should stay where they are." The next morning brought light rain. I put on a coat and knit hat and walked the lake. Wet earth smelled like memories, freshly rinsed. I stood under an oak and listened to the rain on its leaves. Before, I would have used the rain to squeeze in a remote meeting, send emails, update a budget. Now I stood still. I let the rain teach me water's lesson. It falls. It soaks. It doesn't ask permission. Back home, I dried my shoes, put the kettle on, and opened Colin's letter once more. I saw what I'd missed at first. He wasn't asking for anything, and in his clumsy way, he had handed control back where it belongs, to me. A second hinge opened inside, not for anyone to walk through right away, but so the light could step in first. In the afternoon, I stopped by the community room again. The woman who divorced after 30 years spotted me and lifted her hand like you would to a familiar neighbor. We didn't speak. We shared the same room and the same quiet. When we stood, eyes met, and we nodded again. That was enough to know my body was beginning to trust this new peace. After dark, I turned on the porch light and wrote. The words didn't snag anymore. I recorded the fridge note, the walk in the rain, the decision not to call back even after a long message. I added one line to close the chapter. My victory is that I'm not afraid anymore. Not afraid of being called selfish for holding the key to my own life. Not afraid of quiet. Not afraid of seeing my own mistake in the clay pot I'll make tomorrow. Not afraid of closed doors because I know I still have plenty of windows. At Cedar Lake, wind off the water reminded me to draw the curtains. I stood and looked through the glass, my reflection faded, then returned in the kitchen light. I told myself, just like in court and on legacy night, my name is still there, clear and whole, and from tonight on, every breath in this house carries the name Loretta. Not the name of a family line, not the label of a facility, but the mark of a woman who stopped at the right time to step forward the right way. That morning, Cedar Lake was bright, the sunlight like a thin glaze over the water. I put on the cardigan Renee brought and walked the path behind the pines. Joyce's pottery studio sat in an old wooden house by the greenhouse, door painted gray-blue, big windows like a curtain drawn back. Joyce joined Havenridge a few months ago, hair silvered and tied back, voice husky warm like ginger tea. She insists on calling the class, "Make something only your hands can make," not therapy, and not a program. Because everyone has their own flaw, Joyce says. And that flaw is what makes the pot theirs. I didn't go in yet. I stood outside with my hands in my pockets and looked through a film of dust on the glass. Inside, women gathered around wheels, clay wet and shining. Their laughs were small, the kind that touch the corners of the mouth, free laughs you can recognize without sound. One woman slipped and warped the rim. Instead of sighing, she tilted her head and chuckled, like the pot had spoken. Joyce passed behind her, didn't fix it, just touched the back of her hand and whispered something that made everyone smile. I stayed there a long while, filled with the smell of damp clay and sun dust. Something warm rose in me, but without hurry. Along the porch, I stopped at a stone bench under a maple. On its face, someone had chiseled a line, each stroke deliberate. "No one gives your voice back, you take it." I traced the carving. The stone was cold, the words were cold, but the meaning was warm. I had made a long circle to understand this in my own way. In court that day, I spoke a little louder. Now, I don't need volume. I'm using that voice to set my life in order, drawer by drawer, meal by meal, breath by breath. Back home, I brewed tea and opened Colin's letter again. Not to hurt myself, and not to search for an apology that isn't there. I just wanted to see it clearly. He acknowledged my right. That's enough for today. I don't burn the sign. Letter. I fold it and slip it into the cloth-bound notebook. I labeled "Writing About Me," the notebook that doesn't record my children's stories, meetings, medical directives, or transfers. It only keeps my own small things. A still, breezy morning by the lake, the trace of lavender left on my wrist, the shadow I cast on the kitchen floor when I get up at dawn to make tea. The letter lies among those pages like a thread of a different color in the fabric, not pretty, but honest. At noon, I sit at my desk and turn on the computer. There's an old list I wrote before, things to do when I get my breath back. Today's item is anonymous support for 3 families caring for elders at home. I reach out through a small local organization and offer to cover the remaining hospital bills and night caregivers for 6 months, with one condition: don't publish my name. What if they want to know who helped? The coordinator asks. I answer, say it was someone who used to be tired. That's enough. When the transfer confirmations arrive, I exhale. I don't need a photo op. Giving is also a way to speak in my own voice. It doesn't always need a microphone. In the afternoon, I pull the old filing cabinet into the middle of the living room. Oak, heavy, every drawer packed. I spread a cloth on the rug and sit on the floor. Envelopes labeled receipts, pledges, strategy drafts, donor leads. I touch each stack, choosing like I'm choosing seeds. I keep the thank you note from a preschool teacher who brought 10 children to the Havenridge Garden for the first time. I keep the wobbly card from a widow. Here, I'm allowed to be silent. The rest plans that grew into something else. Handbooks that no longer fit. Call lists and meet lists I let go of. I put them in the recycling box, tie the string, set it by the door. The room feels lighter, so do I. At dinner, I set a table for one. I take a cream napkin, place a white china plate with a fine hairline crack like an old vein, and pour water into a tall glass. I lay a sprig of rosemary by the plate, not for anyone to see, but to remind myself, respect doesn't begin on a stage. It starts at a table for one. I sit, eat slowly, and listen to the sound of fork on china. It's been a long time since that sounded beautiful. After eating, I write a thank you letter to the Cedar Lake Community Trust Board. I briefly share about Legacy Evening, about people standing in silence to honor a right decision, and I write the most important line, "Thank you for upholding a no nepotism principle in admissions. Haven Ridge can forgive, but its structure is not allowed to forget." I sign, stamp it, and set it by my wallet. I'll mail it in the morning. As night comes, I go to the garden. The rosemary I replanted behind the house has taken root, its cool green scent curling up when I run my hand against the leaves. I start slow steps along the edge of the grass, counting quietly. 1, 2, 3. At 10, I change direction. No calorie goals, no turning it into a workout schedule, just walking to notice my breath. Each time my foot touches ground, I feel my chest open a fraction more. Even breathing is the reward. In the past, breath was proof I was still alive. Today, it's a small joy. Then I stop on the porch and look toward the gate. Strangely, I no longer guard it, no longer listen for tires, guess at shadows, brace my heart for impact. The gate is still there, matte black paint, hinges that whisper when the wind moves it. But now, the gate guards me not with a lock, but with peace. It's like a gentle old watchman reminding me, slow down, choose who comes in, and remember you can sit too, without waiting for anyone. Late, I call Renee. We talk about the pottery class, about Joyce, about those wobbly bowls everyone loves. Come try tomorrow? Renee nudges. I laugh. I'll come tomorrow. I want to throw a little bowl with my own flaw. Then I tell her about the line carved on the stone bench. Renee says, someone probably carved it for herself first, then for others. I think, that's exactly right. At night, I turn on the small, warm kitchen light and write. I write less, because I don't need to record everything anymore. I write just enough to remember the smells, the light, the laughter. I write about the way a middle-aged woman in class put her hands on the clay like on a stray cat, slow, patient, holding back words. I write about the wind through the pines sounding like paper rustling, about a young couple walking by hand in hand, not knowing that a few yards away a woman is learning to begin again at 69. Before bed, I open the Writing About Me notebook again. I tape in a small scrap cut from a rosemary bag, the scent still faint. Under it, I write one line, "Here, I don't prove. I live." Then I close the notebook and set it on the shelf, where the moonlight touches one corner. Past midnight, a light wind rises. I hear the roof hum, the wood flexing like skin when the weather changes. I don't jump up to check the locks anymore. I know I locked them, and more than that, I've sealed the drafts inside me. Worries don't flood in like before, they knock. I recognize them, then let them go. The gate isn't something I cling to now. It's a quiet brace that reminds me with each passing day I'm a little closer to myself. The next morning I wake early, make a mild coffee, and sit on the steps looking at the lake under a thin veil of fog. I see an older woman pull a small cart past, pause to look into my garden, then smile and nod. I nod back. No words needed. In that small moment, I understand why Joyce insists on calling the class "Make Something Only Your Hands Can Make," because life is the same. No one can throw the pot that holds your peace for you. Others can give clay, water, and a wheel, but the touch has to be yours. In the afternoon, I pass the pottery studio. This time, I push the door open and walk in. The smell of wet clay and the faint trickle at the wash sink greet me. Joyce looks up and smiles. "Here to make your own flawed piece yet?" I answer. "Not sure where the flaw will land, but I'm here to find it." The others shift over and make room for me at a wheel. I roll up my sleeves, Set the clay in the center and press the pedal lightly. The wheel turns, the clay soft under my hands. I don't rush the shape. I just apply enough pressure, listening as my heartbeat falls into rhythm with the spin. Outside the window, the lake glints with a narrow silver streak, like a thread stitching afternoon to evening. At night, I set the table for one again, pour water into the glass, and tuck a lavender sprig in a vase. I look at the note on the fridge, "I am not an asset to be managed," and smile. Turns out, when your voice is back where it belongs, a solo, fate meal can feel as full as a feast. Turns out, when the gate no longer needs you to guard it, it guards you with quiet. So on days you're too tired, you still remember to open a window, let the wind touch your forehead, and say something very soft. That's enough for today, Loretta. Rest. Winter arrives as gently as breath. All of Cedar Lake wears a thin veil of snow, so pristine it seems it would melt at a touch. I brew cinnamon tea, the warm, sweet scent filling the room, and sit by the fireplace listening to the soft crackle like the house's steady heartbeat. Outside the window, the lake is starting to freeze in patches. A few small birds sit on bare branches, fluffing their feathers for warmth. I realize I'm no longer in a rush. No urgent emails, no budgets to review, no meetings I once thought would make the world collapse if I missed them. On the table is the Writing About Me notebook. I open to the last page, pick up my pen, and write the line that closes the story I've been living word by word for months. I'm not waiting for anyone to grant me permission anymore. It's a simple sentence, but each stroke is a year of fear. For years, I lived like a person waiting at a threshold, waiting to be loved, to be accepted, to be nodded through so I could be myself. Now I understand. No one can sign the form that lets you live fully except you. Every Tuesday, I still stop by Havenridge, but not as founder or owner. I go as a friend of the place, bringing cookies, sometimes just to sit in the library and read a few pages, or watch the women in pottery class laugh over the turning wheels. Once, Joyce asked, "Do you feel Havenridge is different now?" I nodded. Different in that it doesn't need me, and it still lives. That made me lighter than any success report I ever got. One afternoon, I get a call from Naomi. Her voice is firm but warm. "Loretta, the civil authority has opened an investigation into Colin and Tessa's financial dealings. We don't need to go to court, just wait for the result." I sit quiet for a moment, then say, "Thank you, Naomi. As for me, I'll let the law handle it." I don't hold grudges anymore. I just hope they learn the lesson I did that possession is never love. That night, I sit by the window and write 3 letters by hand to Tessa, Jenna, and Colin. Plain paper, my handwriting a little shaky but steady. "My children, I'm not asking for an apology, and I'm not blaming you. When you're ready to speak with respect, I'm here. Not to lecture, but to listen. I'm still your mother, but now I'm a mother who keeps her boundaries." I fold the 3 letters and seal them. I'm not sure they'll read them, but that's no longer the point. Some words need to be said so the heart has room to breathe, not to make someone answer. Night falls faster in snow season. I light a candle, put on instrumental music, and write a short passage in my notebook as if for a future reader, maybe a woman sitting in a quiet house where loneliness mingles with regret. If someone is reading this, remember, you have the right to set boundaries even with the people you love. That isn't selfish, it's how you keep your humanity from dissolving into someone else's. Real love doesn't need a deed of ownership. I set down the pen and close the notebook. The fireplace is still glowing, the fire reflecting a warm gold on the wall like skin. Outside, snow falls so slowly it feels like time is sitting here having tea with me. I look toward the lake and see my faint reflection under the thin mist, an ordinary woman with graying hair who no longer needs permission to be herself. I smile. This story, at last, belongs to me. Not a report, not evidence, Not an argument. Just the story of someone who stopped trying to be loved the right way and started loving herself the right way. I set down my teacup and let the cinnamon mingle with the scent of burning wood. Winters are always cold at Cedar Lake, but I know something inside me is warming a fire that needs no kindling, only courage. I add one last line in my journal, like a message to myself and to anyone who's lived through collapse. Don't be afraid of losing someone. Be most afraid of losing yourself while trying to keep them. Then I close the notebook, lean back, and exhale slowly. Outside, the snow keeps falling, but inside me, the sky just broke into sun. Thank you truly for staying with me to these very last lines. If you're still here, maybe somewhere in this story you recognized a part of yourself, someone who once loved with everything, was hurt, and still chose to stand up with gentleness and self-respect. I want to ask you one thing. Where are you listening from? A small kitchen glowing warm, or a quiet room with only a lamp and your heartbeat? Wherever you are, I hope you know you are not alone. If any detail impressed us, when we of action relax my dawn, my journey made you pause, remember, or feel a small ache, please share one line in the comments. Who knows, your small story might be the light someone needs to walk through their own darkness. And if you want to keep going with me with the women, mothers, and fathers who have lost but refuse to fall, please hit follow or tap like. Every comment and every heart you leave is a warm beat that helps this story travel farther and touch more souls who need a hug made of words. I'm grateful to you, from the deepest place in me, for listening, for feeling, and for staying. Because sometimes, just having one person stop with us in the long night is enough to believe we were never truly alone.